Recording in progress.
I hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, April 24th, 2023. Mr. City Manager, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Strawn.
Here.
Councilmember Etten.
Present.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais, we'll see if I get my left and right correct tonight, but on my right at the end of the dais, our attorney, Rachel Tierney. On my left at the other end is our city manager, Pat Trudgeon. We have staff, department heads, and guests who will participate in the meeting as various agenda items come up, and those folks will be introduced at those times. We do want to welcome you all here this evening, and I do believe we have a couple of people maybe participating remotely. For those here in the council chambers, you want to make sure that your phone is silenced or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting. For those participating remotely online, if you wish to speak at any point, either to ask a question or make a comment during public comment opportunities, you'll want to be familiar with the raise your hand feature in Zoom, which will let us know that you wish to speak, and we can bring you in for that purpose at that time. Also want to note for people who may not attend a lot of council meetings, we do have one official copy of all the meeting materials in the binder on the table in the back of the chambers. I believe we have extra copies of the agenda and perhaps other materials as well if you need that to help you follow along. So we want to make sure you're aware of that. With that, then I think the next thing on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll ask folks to stand if you're able. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next on tonight's agenda is approval of the agenda. And as always, I will check with staff first to see, Mr. Trudgeon, are there any changes or corrections that need to be made to the agenda from a staff perspective this evening?
No changes by staff, Mr. Mayor.
All right. With that, then, are there any changes that are requested by council members or items council members would like to have removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration? Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, I'd like to remove the St. Paul Regional Water System contract out of the consent agenda.
All right. That's item 10B. We'll move that to items removed from consent. Any other requested changes from council members? All right, then we'll check with members of the public. As was just noted, we had an item that a council member removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration. The consent agenda is 5 or now 4 items on the second page of our agenda in section 10 called Approved Consent Agenda. These items include approving our payments, approving certain contracts or easement agreements and things like that that are generally taken up as a single motion with limited opportunity for input or questions. But if somebody is here for one of those items this evening, we do want to make sure that you have an opportunity to either make your comment or ask your question on that item. And so we want to check at the beginning of the meeting. If you are here for an item in section 10 on the second page of our agenda, please let us know now, and we can actually move that item earlier in the meeting so that you'll have a chance to speak or ask a question at that point. Once again, this relates only to that section of the agenda, section 10, the consent agenda. Is there anyone here this evening for an item on the consent agenda to speak or ask a question? All right, and if there's anybody participating remotely who wishes to ask a question or make a comment on an item in section 10, this would be the opportunity to use that raise your hand feature and let us know, and we can make a note of that once again for your benefit as well. Is there anyone participating remotely that has their hand raised, Mr. Trudgeon?
There's actually nobody signed in at this point.
Nobody signed in at this point. Okay. All right, with that, then we have the agenda as presented with one change, which is to move item 10B from the consent agenda to earlier in the meeting for separate consideration by the council. Is there a motion to approve that agenda as amended?
So moved. Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for this evening. Next is an opportunity for general public comment. As I noted earlier, there'll be a chance for public comment on agenda items as those items come up in our meeting. But we also do want at the beginning of each meeting to provide an opportunity for general public comment. This might be on matters that are not on this evening's agenda, but are related to either the business of the city or items of interest to people in the community. And so we always do want to provide that opportunity at the beginning of each meeting. Is there anyone here this evening to speak on general items not on tonight's agenda? All right. Seeing no one, and I'm presuming still no remote attending.
We just had somebody join,
All right.
but no hands raised.
No hands raised? All right. Well, then we will move on from public comment and move into some of our business items this evening. The first series of business items are some recognitions and donations. We have four proclamations and then one additional item in this section of the agenda. As always with the proclamations, the order of business is to read the proclamation and then a motion to approve. So we'll begin with the first proclamation, which is proclaiming Asian American and Pacific Island Heritage Month in Roseville. And the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas the City of Roseville is committed to recognizing and honoring the contributions of all members of our community, and whereas in 1992, Congress passed Public Law 102-450, which annually designated May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and whereas the month of May was selected to commemorate the immigration of Japanese citizens to the United States on May 7th, 1843, and to mark the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, with the majority of the workers being Chinese immigrants who are often mistreated. And whereas Japanese American troops fought for freedom from tyranny abroad in World War II, while their families here at home were interned simply on the basis of their ethnic origin. And whereas in 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act opened new doors of opportunity for more Asian and Pacific Islander immigrants to the United States. And whereas the end of the Vietnam War brought new Vietnamese, Cambodian, Hmong, Laotian communities to the United States of America and specifically to Minnesota, and whereas there are over 20 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States, with over 260,000 calling Minnesota home and nearly 3,500 in Roseville based on the 2020 census data. And whereas many Roseville residents identify as Asian American and Pacific Islander, particularly Hmong or Karen community members, they contribute to the vibrant community of Roseville through their rich cultures and also as business owners, educators, scientists, artists, and many other ways. And whereas the Hmong people began arriving in Minnesota in 1975 as refugees from the destructive wars in their homeland, in which the Twin Cities metro region has the largest concentration of Hmong people in America, and whereas the Karen people have been oppressed in their homeland for decades and sought refuge in other places, with St. Paul currently supporting one of the largest Karen communities in America, and whereas despite all the progress, many Asian American and Pacific Islanders continue to face persistent inequality and discrimination, including barriers to equal access to education, employment, and health care. Asian Americans, especially those who are Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh, too often face senseless violence and harassment due to the color of their skin, the tenets of their faith, or merely by being Asian. And whereas in 2023, Asian Pacific and Pacific Islander Heritage Month honors the theme of advancing leaders through opportunity, and whereas the City of Roseville invites all members of the community to renew their commitment to ensuring cultural humility, racial equality, and justice by participating in activities designed to advance the cause of freedom and equality for all, now therefore be it resolved that the City of Roseville declares the month of May 2023 to be Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month in the City of Roseville.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Etten to approve that proclamation. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. The second proclamation is related to mental health awareness and reads as follows. Whereas mental health is part of overall health and helps sustain an individual's thought processes, relationships, productivity, and ability to adapt and change or face adversity, and mental illness adversely affects these abilities and often is life-threatening in nature. According to the Mental Health Alliance, 1 in 5 adults and children will experience mental health condition of one sort or another in their lifetime. Whereas it is important for all to maintain mental health and learn the symptoms of mental illness, because long delays, sometimes decades, often occur between the time symptoms first appear and when individuals get help, and early identification and treatment can make a difference in successful management of mental illness and recovery. And whereas we recognize numerous residents of the City of Roseville are impacted in one way or another by mental illness, and whereas every citizen and community can make a difference in helping end the silence and stigma that too long has surrounded mental illness and discouraged people from getting the help they need, And whereas public education and civic activities can encourage mental health and help improve the lives of individuals and families affected by mental illness, now therefore be resolved, the City of Roseville hereby declares the month of May 2023 to be Mental Health Awareness Month in the City of Roseville.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Our next proclamation relates to older Americans and reads as follows. Whereas Roseville is home to many residents aged 60 and older, and whereas older adults in Roseville are the roots from which our community has grown, who bestow gifts of wisdom and insight upon younger generations and strengthen the bonds between neighbors to create a better place to live. And whereas the City of Roseville recognizes and focuses on older adults taking charge of their health, getting engaged in their communities, and making positive impacts in the lives of others. And whereas older adults are productive, active, and influential members of society, sharing essential talents, wisdom, and life experiences with families, friends, and neighbors. And whereas our community can provide that recognition and respect by enriching the quality of life of older Americans, by increasing opportunities to remain in their communities as active and engaged citizens, by providing services, technologies, and support systems to allow older adults to foster and maintain connections within the community, and by emphasizing the value of older adults by publicly recognizing their contributions to the diversity, strength, and unity of our community. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the City of Roseville hereby declare May 2023 to be Older Americans Month in the City of Roseville. Excuse me, Older Adults Month.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Any discussion on that proclamation? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That passes unanimously. The next proclamation is a new one for us, and this one is related to Poppy Days, and reads as follows. Whereas after the First World War, inspired by the opening lines of John McCrae's wartime poem In Flanders Fields, and championed by international humanitarian workers Moyna Mitchell of the United States and Madame Guerin of France, the poppy was adopted in many countries to commemorate the sacrifices of those who were killed in war. And whereas the United States Veterans of Foreign Wars in 1922 officially designated the poppy as a symbol of remembrance and conducted their first poppy drive that year. And in 1924, the VFW registered the Buddy Poppy as its official commemorative poppy. And whereas VFW Buddy Poppies are assembled by disabled and needy veterans, and the proceeds of the use of Buddy Poppies as a fundraising campaign are used exclusively for the benefit of disabled and needy veterans and the widows and orphans of deceased veterans. And whereas the basic purpose of the annual distribution of Buddy Poppies by the Veterans of Foreign Wars is eloquently reflected in the desire to honor the dead by helping the living. And whereas each year, members of the Roseville, Anderson, Nelson VFW Post 7555 distribute poppies at local sites on the weekend before Memorial Day to raise awareness about the service of veterans and about the importance of Memorial Day. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Roseville hereby declares May 19th, 20th, 21st of 2023 to be Poppy Days in the City of Roseville for the distribution of these symbols of appreciation for the sacrifices of our honored dead, and further urges citizens of this community to recognize the merits of this cause by contributing generously in support of the donations for Buddy Poppies on those days, and be it further resolved that the City of Roseville hereby urges all patriotic citizens to wear a Buddy Poppy as mute evidence of our gratitude to the men and women of this country who have risked their lives in defense of the freedoms which we all enjoy as American citizens.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that proclamation is also approved. Next on our agenda, we have recognition of outgoing commissioners. And I see our Assistant City Manager, Rebecca Olson, coming up to provide some recognition and name names. And so I'll turn it over to Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. As Mayor mentioned, we are here tonight to recognize those outgoing commissioners and thank them for their service. As you know, commissioner service is very dedicated service. Requires a lot of ongoing commitment, additional work outside of commission meetings, and a lot of behind-the-scenes work to bring those recommendations, advice, and issues to the City Council for consideration. Each of the commissioners tonight that you're going to be recognizing have distinguished themselves as stewards not only of our organization, but also as our community. They have each given their time, their knowledge, their resources with one goal in mind, to continuously improve our Roseville community. The city would not be able to accomplish what we do without the work of our community volunteers. So tonight, we recognize those who have served as commissioners and thank them for all of their time and contributions to our community. The city's Finance Commission advises the council on short and long-term financial policy matters and reviews annual financial information. Tonight, we're recognizing two outgoing commissioners, John Murray and Sandra Klein-Heggie. The Human Rights, Inclusion, and Engagement Commission advises on matters of human rights, inclusion, and engagement. They evaluate, advise, and engage residents on programs, events, and projects. Tonight, we're recognizing four outgoing commissioners: Keith Allen, Etienne Jevi, Paul Haas, and David Sindiga. The city's Parks and Recreation Commission makes recommendations on matters relating to parks, recreation programs, facilities, and services. Two commissioners are receiving recognition this evening: Greg Hogue and Michelle Lenhart. The city's Planning Commission identifies and addresses issues concerning development plans, policies, and specific applications. Two commissioners being recognized for their service tonight are Julie Kimball and Emily, I apologize, I'm going to get this wrong, but Lutgen. And our Public Works, Environment, and Transportation Commission advises on those topics as well as other community issues that come up in that area. Two commissioners being recognized this evening are Nancy Misra and Shane Spencer. So this evening, we do have, for those who may be in attendance, we do have certificates of appreciation for all of them. If they weren't able to attend this evening, we will be mailing those out. But I did want to say that each of these commissioners put in countless hours of their time and provided input and advice to both staff and council, and we wanted to say thank you for sharing your time and talents.
All right, and we always want to provide an opportunity for outgoing commissioners who are here to certainly receive their certificate. I've got them right here, and if you'd like, you can also make some comments if you wish. So why don't, the first certificate I have here is for Greg Hoeg. So we can pass it across here.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much for your service.
Thank you.
If you wish to make any comments, you're welcome.
Oh, it's a no comment.
Thank you.
And thank you for your service. Next is Michelle Lenhart, also of the Parks and Recreation Commission. Is Michelle here with us this evening? I didn't think I saw her. And Julie Kimball from the Planning Commission? I didn't think I saw Julie either. All right, are there any other outgoing commissioners who we didn't expect to be here, who are here this evening and wish to be recognized? Didn't see any. All right, well, we'll make sure, as Ms. Olson said, to get the certificates to all those folks. And I hate to say that I've gotten them all out of order now, so you'll have to resort them, but I apologize for that. Go ahead and give those to Pat. And thank you again to all of our outgoing commissioners. We can't do the work that we do as a city council without a lot of that valuable behind-the-scenes work that really helps us to get to the heart of issues and be more connected with the community in terms of the response to the issues that are before us. Because the five of us have just as much limited resources in terms of time as everybody else, and so it's very helpful to have that additional community insight. And like I said, we really couldn't do our business without those volunteer commissioners. With that, then, we'll move to items removed from the consent agenda, and we have the one item 10B, removed by Councilmember Schroeder, and I'll ask Mr. Trudgeon if you can introduce that item for us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Item 10B approves an amendment to the contract with St. Paul Regional Water System regarding supplying water to Roseville, something that they have done since 1962. The proposed amendment sets new monthly base rates and water volume charges with increases annually through 2027. These rate increases were expected when the water rates were set this past fall. And we're looking for your approval of that amendment to the contract.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. And Councilmember Schroeder, you would ask this to be removed, so I'll recognize you for comments or questions that you may
Yes,
have.
I just wanted to make some comments about this. I know that buying our water from the St. Paul is our only option, but I did want to point out that our rate on the base cost is going to go up 50% in the next 5 years. And that is based mainly because St. Paul has some capital expenses that are coming. And unlike Roseville, who tends to put money away in their capital fund to pay for these things over time, it appears St. Paul did not do that. So the rates have to be raised more dramatically in a shorter period of time. And so I wanted to make sure that the residents were aware that it's because of that reason is their water bills have been going up and not so much what Roseville has been doing. And not only is that base cost going up, but the water usage that we use, or the volume, is also going up 40%. And again, that's because of the city. So again, I just wanted to point out that it's going to go up steeply in the next 5 years, but it's because of that capital piece that the St. Paul is looking for. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, and it's probably worth noting that the St. Paul Water Utility, this is not necessarily a surprise to us, certainly as city leaders and officials. The water utility was before us probably 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, introducing us to the project that they were looking to undertake at their facility. And it is an important upgrade in terms of the ability to keep the water clean and safe for everybody to drink. And they're financing it through bonds, which is basically borrowing money and then paying it back, which is the way government entities do it, through issuing bonds and paying interest on those. And it's the cost to pay back the bonds that is the primary contributor to that change in the rates from St. Paul Water Utility. It's not, I suppose, that we don't have other options, but none of the other options are terribly economical either as an alternative in terms of things like sinking our own wells and providing our own water and that sort of thing. So that helps hopefully provide some context. Are there other questions or comments from members of the council? All right, while we've got this item on separate consideration, I'll check with folks in the council chambers here this evening if anybody wishes to speak to this item. Basically, what we're being requested to do is approve this amendment to the ongoing contract with St. Paul Water Utilities to reflect that new rate structure. Anyone from the public wish to speak to this item at this time? All right. With that, we've got the request to approve that amendment to the contract. Is there a motion from the council?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Strawn. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Groff is the maker of the motion.
No, the only tiny silver lining is it's a little less than the original estimate, so that was a plus. But thanks to Councilmember Schroeder and the mayor for explaining that. That's not an easy amount of money to be increasing on our residents, but it's necessary because we all want clean water and we all want safe water. So.
Right, and as the seconder, Councilmember Strawn.
I reiterate the things that have been shared, and just we're very fortunate to have enough water. Other parts of the U.S. aren't as lucky, so we just have to make sure we preserve and look ahead so we continue to have clean, safe water.
All right, is there any other discussion on the motion? No. All right, all those in favor of approving the motion to approve that amendment to the contract with St. Paul Water Utility signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That item is approved. That then brings us to our regular agenda, or back to our regular agenda, and we have our business items next. Our first business item is to convene as the Board of Appeals and Adjustment for the City of Roseville. We had originally convened as the Board of Appeals and Adjustment, or Adjustments and Appeals, as I'm more familiar with calling it, to consider an appeal by the folks at Prince of Peace related to a ruling by our city staff in relation to activity on their site a little while ago. As part of that original ruling, there was a time frame within which the property would have to be brought into compliance with that ruling. And before us this evening is a request to consider an extension to that time frame. So we will convene as the Board of Adjustments and Appeals with the same roll call as called for the council meeting. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Trudgeon to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, we are here to consider a request by Prince of Peace Church to extend the May 5th, 2023 compliance deadline and date to remove 2 microunits at 2555 Victoria Street. That's the property of Prince of Peace Church. As noted in the case on March 6th, and it's by you earlier, the City Council, acting as the Board of Appeals and Adjustment, denied the appeal from Prince of Peace regarding the placement of the micro units on their property and ordered the use to cease and units to be removed by May 5th, 2023. Since that time, staff has met with representatives of Prince of Peace to discuss the possibility of establishing a more permanent mini unit or tiny home development on their site. As a result of that discussion, we have that ongoing. Prince of Peace has indicated that they are undergoing a process with its members to determine if they want to continue to provide housing through micro units on their property or on a more permanent basis, or provide for other types of affordable housing on their property. Prince of Peace has indicated that they will finish that process by October 1st of this year. In addition, in the background, there is pending legislation at the Minnesota legislature that would allow for what is called sacred communities to be created and provide permanent micro-unit housing for those persons experiencing chronic homelessness, extremely low-income persons, and/or designated volunteers. The sacred settlements would need to meet certain criteria that are outlined in the legislation regarding life safety standards. The sacred community, as I note in the staff report, legislation is currently in 2 omnibus bills. It's in the House Omnibus Labor Bill and the Senate Omnibus State Government Bill. Both are awaiting action in the House and Senate. I would note that the session is scheduled to end on May 22nd of this year, so a little bit less than a month. Finally, the Prince of Peace Church would like to pursue an interim use to allow for that continued use through the end of the year. That is, of course, assuming the legislation passes. The way the legislation is currently written, the law would take effect on January 1st, 2024. And the interim use would allow Prince of Peace to continue the use in using the state legislation and presumable law as a guidepost to make improvements to those units to allow them to remain in place and in use through the end of the year once the new law takes effect. So as a result, they are asking that we extend the stay of enforcement until July 30th in order for some things to happen, to have some more knowledge on the state law, as well as to go through the interim use process. Staff has reviewed the requests and suggests, if the council is willing to grant the extension, that you condition that on meeting several deadlines by certain dates. And they're outlined in the staff report. I would mention we do have a newer resolution with some more precise wording on the conditions, but they are as follows. 1, holding an open house on or before May 21st, 2023. I would note that Prince of Peace has already applied for an open house and paid the appropriate application fees, and as of now plan to hold the open house on May 21st. The second date that would be regarding the sacred community legislation be approved, the same or similar in form as it currently is by the end of the legislative session. As I note, that's May 22nd, as well as being signed into law by the governor. And then the third date is a deadline to apply for an interim use to allow for micro units to be on the property by June 2nd. I would note that the process to actually apply for an interim use does require an open house to be held, and that's what's in process, and they have to wait until after that to actually apply. June 2nd is the last date when we could get that consideration on the July Planning Commission and then brought forward to the council later in July for consideration. So hence the July 30th date to allow for that process to fully play out. We do mention in the staff report that these dates must be met. If any one of those dates are not met, then the enforcement extension would end, and we would take immediate action to enforce the decision by the council that that use can no longer stay and be used in that way here. With that, I will pause and see if you have any questions. As I mentioned, we do have a resolution slightly modified from the paper packet. It was updated with the online packet today. It's also the dais, and we have a copy in the back. It's just some wordings around condition number 1 and number 2. So with that, I'll pause to see if there's any questions, and I know there's representatives of Prince of Peace in the audience as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions for staff? And I guess you do want to clarify one thing on the conditions. So as it reads, if any one of those conditions isn't met, so for instance, the second condition about the legislation passing and being signed by the governor, if that doesn't happen, which theoretically would be probably the first thing that might happen other than the open house, then my presumption is that it may not be, at that point, worth pursuing the interim use on the part of Prince Peace, and so that condition triggering the enforcement pretty much ends the interim use process, as I understand it, anyway.
Well, so from staff's perspective, we don't feel that it can be supported to go through an interim use process if there's no state law change. If there is a state law change, then we can have the discussion about the terms of that based on the criteria. Since it is law that was passed, may not be in effect, but it's coming, I think to not have any guidance from the state on that and go to interim use, Prince of Peace could certainly still apply. I'm not saying they couldn't apply, but I think as a staff, we would have to look at that a little bit differently, given that there's no ability for us to deviate from state law, state building code, and city code without lots of changes into our code, for instance, as well as the state building code. So yes, to answer your question, if that date is not met, then the stay would end and enforcement would begin immediately. We know the hard date for the session is May 22nd. The governor may sign that a little bit later, so we can't precisely predict when that is, but typically it follows pretty quickly after that. So I think by June 2nd, we would know that before they would have to apply for an interim use.
Right, and I guess the point of the question also was that if the legislation isn't passed, like you're saying, conceivably, Prince of Peace could continue to pursue an interim use. However, they don't have the basis of proceeding
Correct.
on state law at that point, and the city doesn't have regulations in place, and so theoretically, it would be hard for the city to consider an interim use in the absence of the city's own regulations. We'd have to sort of do it on the fly, which creates a lot of challenges for everybody, it would seem. So I think it seems like using the state law as the basis for things is a good foundation to sort of build this process upon, as I understand it.
Yeah. Yes, and I would say that we're not making any predetermined decisions if the state law doesn't pass, but I would say we'd have to look at it differently if the state law did not pass, if we did get an interim use, and we'd have to consider it on its own merits and make a decision at that time.
Right, okay. Other questions for staff? Councilmember Strong?
Yes, I was wondering, who is the open house for? And who will be advertised to that? Because clearly, given where that is, there's no other homes directly within that 500 feet radius.
So as part of the interim use process, it's required under code for the proposer to hold an open house. They apply with the city sends out notification, the mailing to residents, I believe, within 500 feet. Looking at, 500 feet from the edges of that property. So you may be right, in this particular case, there's not a lot of residential homes, but it is sent to those within there. There's also a list of people that get all open house notifications in the community, which is quite a lot of people, actually, so it will be publicized that way as well. Then the results of that open house or notes or minutes of that open house need to be submitted as part of the interim use application, so the city can see the comments and what the conversation was as part of that. So it is a required component of our city code.
Right. I just was wondering if it was, if people outside of that area were welcome to attend
Certainly.
and have a voice involved with that.
Yes.
Because I'm certain the church folk will be invited and feel part of it, but maybe folks outside of that area may not know
Certainly,
or
yep.
feel like they're part of it. I also had another question about, not quite related. I guess I can probably hold this right now.
Oh, right. Other questions for staff? Councilman Brad?
There are a number, in the proposed legislation, there are a number of building code and safety pieces to that, and I'm wondering if we can get a report on staff on what is in place, just based on what the units are right now, what needs to still be done. If we could just get that clarified. It's really under the proposed legislation, it's subdivision 4, micro-unit requirements.
So I may call some other folks up here, but it's my understanding that not much of anything has been met currently as we sit here today. I would say there is a provision for water and kitchen facilities that can be in adjacent property, which is listed in the legislation, and that's what has been used to date with the current situation. But as far as anchoring, meeting ANSI certification for electrical and installation and all those things, that's something that has not occurred. As you note in the submittal requirements, they being Prince of Peace, working on a schedule, will submit it by June 2nd as part of the interim use on their schedule to get those improvements made. I do also know there's been ongoing conversations as recently as today with settled and contractors with our building official and community development director about attempting to meet those standards, and those conversations are ongoing.
So even insulation and I think the wall structures are not for sure right now?
I don't think we understand what's there because we've not inspected it, and so that's something we would need to verify throughout the process. And I could be speaking out of turn here if Mr. England has the word.
So far, Mr. England's agreeing with you with his various head motions, but maybe we want something more definitive. Thank you.
Sure.
Which question would you like me to start with first?
So you heard my line of questioning, moving beyond the toilet, looking at more the structure of the building. We know the anchoring is something that's up in the air at this point. It's a really important safety thing. We just had our severe weather awareness week last week, and this is not properly anchored as this code would do, as current state code would require for safety of the residents in those buildings. Carbon monoxide, I mean, where are we at with this stuff?
We have not received anything specific to the construction of these units. That is what we are waiting for, to see if they're in line with the proposed legislation, and if they meet those standards. We have been told that that will be coming, the plans for each of the units and their plan for anchoring to the ground and the other requirements that are in there, but we have not seen that yet. We have not received that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Groff?
So the way this is written, those will have to be met before this would be approved
Correct,
in the end of, okay.
correct.
Or there would be conditions of the interim use approval, I imagine.
Right.
Correct.
And I believe that and we can certainly, we'll hear from representatives from Prince Peace, but I believe there's an intention as expressed in some of the communications to try to achieve a lot of that compliance earlier than the interim use date necessarily. So, other questions? Councilmember Strong?
It's more of a comment or a pointed out, I know in definition, under the definition of a sacred community, it indicates providing permanent housing for chronically homeless persons. And that was something that last time we spoke, there was uncertain on the part of the church that this was a permanent situation that they were still looking at as temporary and hadn't decided. So that's definitely an area of concern. Have you heard anything to the contrary, or would, if these conditions were met, would that constitute what's deemed a permanent structure then?
Potentially.
Might be a question for staff.
Thank you.
Well, and I would just add
City
that
manager.
that it would be considered permanent if that state law passes.
Oh.
It's currently not considered permanent, even the situation that is described in legislation until it's passed. Up until that point, it doesn't meet the code requirements for permanency for residents.
Right. Actually, there's kind of two aspects of permanency in relation to this. There's one is the permanency of the structure on the site and its ability to be moved. And the second is whether the housing itself is considered permanent housing or temporary housing under some sort of time limit. And as I myself as a non-attorney interpret the intent of the legislation, I believe their intent is to talk about it in terms of the longevity of somebody staying there, in terms of the permanence of the housing as an option for somebody. And as I was thinking about that myself, I was thinking, well, actually, permanence has different definitions for different people, and so certainly I can imagine under this legislation, and I'm not once again an attorney or providing legal advice, but individuals could decide to provide something less than permanent housing because it's still, as long as it still meets those requirements, they could decide that they put their own artificial time limit on something for people, but that doesn't have to do with what we might necessarily approve of what's in the state legislation. But anyway, just to maybe belabor that point excessively. Any other questions for staff? Councilmember Hatton?
Do we have any clarity from our public safety folks about meeting the access requirements for emergency vehicles? Or is that again something that would be looked at later?
They're certainly aware of the units, and I've not heard any concerns expressed, but that's something we would look at very thoroughly as part of the process.
Councilmember Strong?
I just want one additional question for Mr. England. As far as the RV, it hasn't been mentioned in any of these things, but it appears to still be occupied and on church grounds. So where does that fall in all of this?
These 2 units that are on the site, or?
As far as permanent housing or semi-permanent housing, as far as, where we stand, because at the time when we spoke last, the RV was seen as like a couple-day use, but it's been months now and it continues to be there. Just wondering if that's figuring into our greater evaluation of the housing on this lot.
Councilmember Strawn, if I could just a clarifying question.
Sure.
Are you talking about the actual RV that's parked in the back of, not the 2 micro units?
Correct.
Okay.
Because I think it was originally the structure that someone in one of the micro units was living in, but it appears to be someone else is living in.
I think it's a
I
separate.
think it was a separate
Separate.
instance.
Okay, separate instance, okay.
And as far as I recall from our past discussion, we don't necessarily regulate the private parking of RVs on property.
Yep, not on commercial property, no.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a determination by the property owner themselves as to what their requirements are.
That's correct.
All right, any other questions for staff? All right, thank you, Mr. England.
Thank you.
Why don't we, if there's a representative from Prince Peace who wants to speak to this evening, this would be your opportunity to do so in support of the requested action to extend the stay of enforcement.
Hello, I'm,
Feel free to have a seat,
Yeah.
and I just ask that you once again introduce yourself at the
Okay.
beginning of your comments.
okay, well, I am Michael Stetzler, president of Prince Peace Congregation, and with me is Steve Svam, who's a member of our congregation, and is the new chair of our campus planning task force, which we created a couple of days after, well, a week after our last meeting with you, part of our process of responding and moving ahead with things. So Steve has a bad case of laryngitis, so I'm not going to ask him to speak unless there's something he's uniquely qualified to answer.
Or if he needs to step in and interrupt you if you're saying
Yeah.
something you shouldn't be, right?
Before you ask questions, I just want to clarify one thing with respect to building codes and so forth. The units that are on our property right now are built to the same standards as the units over at the Mosaic Settlement on Wheelock, which were inspected and passed and meet the specified codes for structure as described in the legislation. I believe I'm correct. Is that correct? Meredith Campbell is with us, and she is with the Sacred Settlement over at the Mosaic community on Wheelock Parkway. So your building inspector hasn't had a chance to independently verify it. We haven't gotten plans in to him for that, but that will happen. But just rest assured, these are stick-built, they're well insulated, they meet all the requirements, the code requirements as specified in the legislation.
Right, and feel free, if you have any kind of statement you wish to make in support of your request for the extension of the stay, this is your opportunity to do so. Otherwise, if you just want to stand for questions, that's okay too.
Well, I just want to thank you and the city staff in particular who were engaged very directly, honestly. We struggled a little bit on our end, and I'm sure the city staff did on theirs to figure out how to move forward, but we took some of their suggestions, and we believe we can meet all the expectations that they've laid out, and so I just want to thank you all.
All right, well, thanks. Are there questions for the representatives of Prince of Peace this evening? We do have kind of the outline of some of the things that need to be addressed that you've sent us and the sort of the timeframe for addressing those. I do want to sort of get to one of the probably, I might say, most urgent, sort of health and sanitation needs, which is, I'm imagining it'll take a while to get the units plumbed maybe and connected to any kind of sewer service. Is there any expectation to try to move forward more quickly with providing sort of that emergency toilet facility in the units if the access to the church isn't fast enough, for lack of a better way of expressing it?
Yes, there are discussions underway and plans underway to come up with options as described in the state legislation to provide a dry or compostable toilet in the facilities. There is no plan to plumb these at the present time. It's not required in the state law, and the access to the plumbing inside our building is pretty sufficient now, according to the residents. They have no complaints with it.
Sure. Yep, and I appreciate that, and I just, once again, I wanted to make sure that we addressed that particular issue,
Yes.
because that seems to be, of all the things that are sort of described and outlined, potentially the one that could be the most acute, and really, I think, in terms of just editorializing a little bit here, in terms of the quality of life of people using those buildings.
Right,
So,
right.
appreciate that. Other questions? Well, we've got the representative of the principals. Right, thank you. Appreciate you being here this evening. If other questions do come up, we will keep you on standby.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right, next is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to this item. We do want to make sure that we hear from folks on all the decisions that we make as the city council, or in this case, as the Board of Adjustments and Appeals. Just a quick outline for anyone who wishes to speak tonight, and it's totally your option whether you wish to do so. We ask that you begin your comments with your name and your street or your address for the public record, and address your comments or questions to the city council. And if we do need to then follow up with answers from the staff or anything like that, we will do that after with the completion of the comments. We do have a 3-minute time limit per speaker, and I do try to enforce that as gently and generously as I can. Usually folks can say a lot within 3 minutes, so it's usually not an issue for most individuals. The other piece of it, once again, is to address the comments to the council and not sort of engage in conversations with other audience members or members of staff during the comments. That just makes things a little more efficient and allows for the process to move a little more smoothly. So with that, I will open it up for anyone who wishes to comment. The only other thing I'll say is we've got 2 microphones there, so if you do wish to speak and somebody is already at the table speaking, feel free to come on up and have a seat at the other microphone and get ready to speak when that person is finished. If there's not a great demand for speaking, it's not required that you do that, but it does help move the process more quickly. So with that, once again, I'll open it up for public comment on this particular item at this time. I should note for folks participating remotely, if anybody does wish to comment, they can use the raise your hand feature to let us know. All right. No hands raised? No. All right, we'll ask one more time just to be sure, if anybody wishes to comment. Right, it doesn't appear that anybody wishes to comment during public comment at this time on this item, so we'll close the opportunity for public comment and move to council consideration. Once again, we've got the resolution before us, and actually in a slightly revised form as a bench handout that revises the wording of the conditions on the second page, lines 67 through 74. Is there a motion from the council or from the board at this point?
So moved.
Let's move to adopt the resolution.
Adopt.
All right.
In the draft that was submitted as a bench handout.
All right. Is there a second to that motion? I'll second the motion. Discussion on the motion. As the maker of the motion, Member Groff.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the staff and for the congregation and your leadership for working together on finding something that will go forward. The last thing we want is someone who needs a home in Roseville to be homeless. So that's my basis for my motion here. I think moving ahead the way is described in the information tonight is the right way to go. There are some stipulations in there, and I think that will help everyone in this case. So that's why I'm making the motion.
I'll defer as the seconder. Any other discussion from members of the board? Member Strawn?
I'll just indicate that I support the adjustments that are made, knowing that the state is moving forward, but I do want to make sure that the parameters as set forth are fulfilled, and I'm just concerned about making sure that we especially fit into the water and such, since some of the reports we originally had were that the folks were using kitty litter in their units, whether or not that's what was the case, but just want to make sure that we're providing a location that is humane for people as well. So, but I think as long as they follow the timeline, and then if by some chance the state didn't move forward, we can address that.
Great. Other discussion? Councilmember Bratton, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I guess I have some concerns with the motion. I'm not sure how to vote yet, but we're being asked to essentially reverse our decision from 6 weeks ago. Clearly, the biggest thing that's changed is the state has moved forward legislation that looks like it could pass that would change the game, and I think that's a very important thing. That's part of my decision-making. That would allow something similar to, but not exactly what's happening there, but something similar to what is currently at the location. But at this point, we as a council have actually no more conclusive changes or improvements to the conditions for the folks living in those units. Right, there's nothing, we don't have inspections that have been done, we don't have any upgrades that have been done. It's all proposed, it's all gonna happen in the future, might happen by this date. And so for me, my hesitancy here is that we don't have anything to hold on to right now. If there is a tornado next week, which could happen, these things aren't anchored. Do they have access to church? Sure, but there's a reason why the anchors are in the legislation. There's a reason why mobile homes are asked to be anchored for the safety of the residents and that. So I have real concerns about the safety and the health of folks living in those units and are allowing them to continue without any of those changes in any definitive timeframe. Suggested timeframes, but no, here's when it's happening. And we all know that construction doesn't always happen right away. So I'm concerned about that. I think that's an important concern for us as a council to have. It should be noted that the resident was offered permanent housing that meets current code and chose to not take that housing twice now, including the last month. And I think that's another important piece. This is not putting someone out on the street. This is someone who's been offered safe, affordable housing and has chosen a different path. So we have to think about that as a city.
Right. Other discussion on the motion? Member Shore.
I do have some concerns as well when it comes to the, what has been done since we met last time. It seems like the timeline is a little longer than I'm comfortable with. Even here it says that there won't be insurance till 6/2 or perfect. So does that mean it's uninsured? I mean, that's a small thing, but then, and I agree with the anchoring. Some of these things, I guess could have been worked on, I thought, a little more rigorously since the last time we met, so, so that's I'm a little concerned about too, and yes, council member Etten makes a good point, we did offer housing twice, and I think if she would have taken that would have solved the problem, because then there's not someone living there, and then that would have bought more time, because then there's no one living there. So if she would have taken the housing option, it would have given Principes as much time as they would like, in that aspect. So I'm a little, concerned about that too, but I am also very aware of the legislation coming down from the state and their outlines, and so to me that was the piece that could be a game changer in this whole thing, was that possibly becoming law, because we would want to make sure that we're in compliance with that if that happens. But that isn't going to become law till January 1st of 2024. So there's a lot of time there that needs to be, things need to be done long before that becomes law, I would think. And so the conditions, I'm glad staff put the conditions in there. They're very good. So anyways, I'm kind of struggling with it as well.
Right, and I did defer, so wanted to note and recognize the comments made by all the members, and the concerns. I don't disagree with the concerns, and I share some of them. I think in practical terms that if there is an interim use approved, that approval would apparently on this schedule be by the end of the stay of enforcement, which would be July 30th, which would provide for 5 months of the interim use being in effect before the law goes into effect, and theoretically, the interim use requirements correspond with the law, and so that, it's certainly, it's not tomorrow that those conditions necessarily go into effect. But, that would officially probably be the soonest timeframe, and then, there's the implementation once the interim use might be approved. But I do understand that there are efforts being undertaken even during the process, sort of independently by Prince Peace, also to do some compliance with those requirements in the state law. And so that helps in terms of some of those concerns that have been raised. Once again, we don't necessarily have enforcement in place other than, I suppose as a condition of extending the enforcement, we could decide to potentially put a condition for time frame on other things, but I'm not sure completely how that might work and what kind of authority we have to do that, and I will definitely defer to our legal advisor in that regard if we choose to go down that road. But I think that it's absolutely true that the state law is the game changer in terms of this, because it is actually doing something that cities don't like the state to do, which is to actually supersede local control over these types of issues by saying that under state law, cities have to allow these types of uses with very valid conditions put in place, and I don't necessarily disagree that it's going to be a good approach. It's just sort of the notion of it's being imposed on cities, and cities don't generally like that because we like to adapt things and make the rules for what's best for our community and our needs. But given the fact that there is the state law under consideration, and that we've got some processes in place that can ultimately put some of these requirements into place for people, it gives me more hope in terms of supporting this. I completely understand the notion that there would be a lot less pressure on the process if the homes weren't occupied, and that was a little bit, I think, part of the objective of the approach that the board took at our last meeting. Circumstances do change, and understandings of the ground around us certainly can become more clear, and so that's part of my maybe change in thinking a little bit towards supporting the resolution. So I think that's maybe all I'll say at this point. I note that the representative Prince of Peace wanted to say something. Did you have something particular to respond to in terms of, and please
Yes, I
feel free
do.
to come up to the table,
Yes, I do.
just very briefly.
Just quickly, 2 points. First of all, Councilmember Schroeder, the units and the residents have been fully insured since the inception of the project. Just for the record, we have carried the insurance before they even moved in. Secondly, with respect to offering other housing, just cast your mind back to when we talked about this in the first place. This approach to homelessness is based on community first, or full community. It's not just a house. It is a community. What you're asking us to do is sever the essentially familial, at this point, relationships that make this work. So that's why we're so adamant about this being a faith-based project. We provide community. Another house someplace in St. Paul is not that community. Thank you.
All right, thank you for those clarifications. We do have the motion before us being considered by the Board of Adjustments and Appeals. And if there's any additional discussion at this time, this would be the appropriate time for it. Member Groff?
I'd just like to make one comment on that. One of the things we have to remember is just because something's offered, the person does have a choice. And I think for us as a governing body to just say, hey, you were offered something and you should have taken it, I don't think that's giving them the correct respect in this situation. So that's my argument on that one.
And just a thought on that is, I think the thing we're all concerned about is the quality of life of individuals that are being provided housing, whether it's in Roseville or anywhere else. And I do know that some of the offerings that may be out there for temporary shelter or others, may not be as desirable and may not have the same kind of support built in. We have to weigh that against the issues of safety, health, and those things for the residents, because we don't want to be in a position of supporting something that doesn't provide adequate addressing of people's needs. I think that it's fair to say that in the interim period here, we're not going to be completely satisfactory in that regard if we go ahead with this motion. And I think we should all acknowledge that. And that, our ultimate goal is, once again, to have completely safe, completely healthy, and completely dignified and appropriate housing for every individual, whether it's the individuals involved here in this particular case or anyone else in the community, because that's really ultimately our charge as public officials, is to make sure that we ensure that for people. And we should acknowledge that in this interim period under this resolution, there is going to be not quite meeting that by the standards we'd like to see. And so it's a transitional process. We also understand that Prince of Peace has a process that may take even longer than the July timeframe to sort of work through the broader, bigger issues as a congregation about how to deal with a lot of these issues in the community and how they want to approach it as a congregation. And we completely want to be respectful of that. We don't want to artificially rush that either as an entity to the extent that we have authority. We don't want our authority to be pushing that process any faster than it has to. But we have a framework to work within, whether it's today's framework or the framework under the new law. Ultimately, we will have to work within that framework, and everybody will. And so we'll figure that out as we get to that point. But at least this outlines a process for us. Member Atten.
I'd like to acknowledge pretty much all of what you just said there, and appreciate you balancing. I understand that there are different forms of housing that that we want to make sure that we are respectful of that, and I appreciate the concept behind the sacred settlement and creating a broader home community. I understand that. Coming back to the mayor's points about health and safety, those are other things. So here we don't want to push anyone's timeline, but yet we have a health and safety thing right now.
Right.
And that's my concern as a governing body,
Right.
that we do have to balance these things, but sometimes we have to do one thing to make sure everyone's safe until the other processes go through. That's my concern.
Sure.
Right.
All right, are there any other comments or discussion from the board on the motion before us to adopt the resolution? Member Schroeder.
I have one more comment. I appreciate you answering my questions on because of the report says insurance is going to be in June, so thank you for clarifying that. And I absolutely understand the value of community. That is the thing to have to help people, no matter what the issues are. Mental health, homelessness, whatever. So, that community piece is very, very important, absolutely. So thank you for pointing that out. And again, we're trying to balance with the zoning regulations that have been put in our charge to enforce up here, balancing with all of these things. And so it's good that staff could work with you to figure out some ways to move forward with this. And also, again, for me, it would be, once you get to your process of deciding if this is the route you want to go, I think that will make things much cleaner and easier as we move forward. So hopefully, the sooner the better with that process as well. So thank you.
All right, we've got the motion before us. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of adopting the resolution extending the stay of enforcement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 4-1 with Member Etten in opposition. Right, that then is the ruling of the Board of Appeals and Adjustments. Thank you, everyone, once again, and look forward to the next steps in the process proceeding forward. And thank you all for being here this evening. That brings us to our next item under business, returning to the role as the City Council and adjourning the Board of Adjustments and Appeals in order to do that. We do have, why don't we take just about a 5-minute break to maybe allow for some transition between these items. All right, we're back from a short break here and continuing on with our city council agenda. Next, under business items, we have item 7B, which is to review and consider an ordinance amending the city code chapter 309 for related to massage therapy licensing. And I'll turn it over to city manager Trudgeon to bring this item back before us for consideration this evening. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you noted, we're bringing this topic back. We've talked about this, I think 4, maybe 5 times over the past 18 months here, and so we're hopefully on our last lap here in regards to this. So we last discussed this topic on April 10th. Consensus by the council was to, we talked about the proposed changes, but the council, after some testimony from the public and conversation, did request staff make some modifications to the proposed ordinance and bring it back to tonight. Staff also took that opportunity to continue to looking at it and making some technical corrections and fixing some inconsistencies in the draft. So the staff report outlines the changes from the April 10th meeting. I'll go over them real briefly here. Obviously, the biggest change is to remove the cap of only 10 massage therapy establishment licenses contained in the draft ordinance amendment, as well as to remove the current cap of 24 establishment licenses. So on the following slides are what is in the staff report. 30901, purposes and finding. We modified that because there was some inconsistency regarding whether or not owners or operators of massage therapy establishments need to be licensed massage therapists. They do not under the code. The way the language was in E was kind of inconsistent to that, so we just cleaned that up. We added under the definition of massage therapy the word rehabilitation that was directly mentioned during the conversation. The council directed us to add that in there. 30903, okay, we'll spend some time on this particular one. This was very specific references. This had specific references to certain state statutes and state code, and we tried to clean this up better and just said a very broad definition of people. This is regarding exceptions. Let me take a step back. This is regarding exceptions that do not need a massage therapist license if it's a professional license by the Board of Medical Practice or the Minnesota Department of Health. We had language previously that had very specific mentions, a licensed doctor, and some other things as well. So we decided to make a very broad look at this because some of the definitions may change. It may not be all encompassing of newer techniques or newer treatments and newer practitioners. So we try to make that all inclusive as much as possible. So you'll see that in number 2 in the code in that section. Mayor Rowe did ask a question of staff and regarding some potential changes. One, we had kept in, that's shown off crossed off right here, but number 1, we had persons duly licensed as a doctor, and the question from Mayor Rowe, and he can certainly speak to it, was whether we should just remove the word doctor from that. In looking at that, myself and City Attorney Tierney thought, given that number 2 has been brought in, that it's a little bit redundant, so we can just remove 1 completely. So that's different from what's in your packet. So we would look to remove 1 as shown in the cross out. The new language on this slide does show the new wording in number 2, which will be the new number 1, talking about professional license by the Board of Medical Practice or Minnesota Department of Health. We had some language that the person providing the massage does not need to be licensed if they're directly related to the massage is directly related to the medical or health treatment and is administered on the premises, the medical or health business. That led to the next conversation regarding whether or not we want to allow persons providing medically what's the word I'm looking for? Prescribed massage can receive it in home. Currently, we don't allow for any massage therapy to occur in private homes from a licensed practitioner. The mayor did mention that maybe we want to consider, and staff wouldn't necessarily disagree, this makes some sense, to still allow medical providers of massage therapy to go to somebody's home to provide therapy. But we would not allow for a therapist to go to somebody's home and just not have any connection to any other particular business and do things at home. So it has to be through medical purposes the massage would happen. If you want to do that, and you should all talk about that, we would suggest eliminating that last part of that sentence, and it's kind of double strike through. If you can see that little thicker line, and it says, and is administered on the premises of the medical or health businesses. That would open up for those medically influenced massage therapy to be done in homes. So granting, denying, suspending, revoking therapy establishment licenses, this is where we had the cap in before, and you see below is the language that was actually removed from the section there, both H and I. I was related about not applying for an application in time. If they missed that deadline, they would, the cap would be in effect for that new license, because it would be considered a new license. That is no longer relevant since the cap has been removed. Moving on then, the 30606 restrictions and regulations was modified to require a person under this chapter to produce a photo identification with the name and address upon demand by the police officer. We want to be very specific what information we are looking for, so we did add that. 30906, again, D, talk about the transfer. In the draft that you have, we did keep that first part of the transfer language in there, but removed other language in there that had the 5-year timeline and other things in there. Since we no longer have the cap, that language is no longer relevant, so we removed it. In talking some more about it, there is an argument to be made that in all essence, we don't actually ever really transfer licenses. Every license is considered a new license, looked upon its merits. Even if somebody sells a business, they still have to apply for a new license. That overall transfer language we have in there could be removed in its entirety. We do have a general statement in 301 that talks about transfer of licenses and kind of guides us through that, but in actuality, it's always going to be a new license. So even though they might call it a transfer, they might be selling their business, for us, it's still a new license. So the whole language is transfer. It doesn't really make any sense. When we had a cap in there, we had to kind of address it, and this is a section we're doing that. So we would suggest maybe just removing 30906D completely. These other ones here are some minor changes here, just be a little bit more specific about hours, and then talking about what appropriate clothing has been required to be worn and where they can massage certain body parts. We also made a correction at the end in 30906Q just to get for consistency. We talked about massage enterprise business, which we didn't use anywhere else in the ordinance, so just change that to massage therapy establishment. So I know that's a lot of changes there, but let me just encapsulate them here. So we're recommending the adoption of the ordinance as shown in the packet, and have specific discussion on 3 items, removing 30903C1 regarding exceptions to massage therapist licenses. That's removing that number 1 in that paragraph and just having the overall coverage of who is exempt from getting a license. 30903C2 to allow for medically directed massage therapy to be done in homes. Have that conversation if you want to specifically allow that. And we showed the language that would need to be removed for that. Then finally, removing 30906 about the transfer of establishment licenses. That's what I just talked about. So those are all conversations you should have. If you want to do all those, we have the way to do that, and we can make any motions subject to those changes being done. I would note that we are getting very close, if not at the end of the line, for us to really effectively renew these applications. We're sending things out very shortly, and so I really urge the council to consider approving that tonight. And if there are some things that are we can't sort out, maybe we pass what we can pass and come back and bring some additional things. But we do want to, as much as possible, have these new regulations in place as we go through the next cycle, which we'll be sending them out this week. The applications, the actual license starts July 1st, but it takes some time to process and go through all that, so we really need to kind of get it done tonight. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. That was a lot to cover. And I did want to just check in with you, and when you talked about the transfer and taking out the 30906 language about transfers altogether, did you note that there is general transfer language?
In 301.
In 301, okay.
Yep, yep.
I was just trying to look at a bunch of different things while you're doing that, so I apologize for not giving you my undivided attention at that moment. But that was, I think, an important thing to note, is that we do have general transfer language for all licenses in our code already. So I think, to me anyway, the provisions for transfer that might be specific to particular licenses would be if there's provisions beyond what's just our general requirements in that general transfer section. So, and an example would be in our liquor licenses, we do have some language specific to those transfers that is, and I think also for tobacco licenses, that's very specific for those, that goes beyond just the general requirements. So appreciate staff looking into that. And the other items that I brought up, I wasn't prepared to have those in the presentation this evening, so I'll just set my slides aside. With that, are there any other questions for staff on the proposed amendments this evening? Councilmember Schroeder.
Yes, I just have one question for you. Under 309.6, you talked about the valid photo, and you talked about, but then specifically that a police officer, do you need to put in police officer or city staff? Because is it possible that we may have someone else go in there besides a police officer asking for that information?
That's not a bad suggestion. We just replicated the existing language, which said a police officer. We did not add city staff in there. And I know we talked a little bit about a third party.
Right, that's what I was
As
thinking.
well. We'll have to shake that out to see if that's even possible, but to maybe broaden that, or other representative of the city might be
Yes,
the
yes.
better term
Oh,
to
yeah,
use,
yes.
to add in there if we want to cover everything.
Otherwise, I think all your amendments make a lot of sense, so thank you.
I think just in that note, to be consistent with our code enforcement language, I think what we say there is something to the effect of, and we don't say police officer there, I think we refer to it as a city enforcement official or something along those lines. Because obviously, you know, we're not talking about a plow driver being able to access
Right.
this information. It's got to be somebody associated with the enforcement. So if you use language along those lines, city enforcement official or something like that might be appropriate. Councilman Bratton?
I had a question about that same thing, and we have a different, in C, right below B, it says, "The issue and authority or designee and/or the city police department shall have the right to enter and inspect the." We use either that same language or the language you mentioned, Mayor.
Yep.
For me, would be more consistent, as long as we legally don't have to have that person be a police officer
Right.
inspecting the valid photo ID, right? That's a little more user-friendly as we try to do enforcement or inspections, really.
We don't have to change the law every time we change who does the enforcement, if we can. Councilman Bratton, I think Councilmember Strawn, you'll be next.
In A there, in 30906, it's been brought up by some public comment, and I had thought about this before. It's talking about where this license needs to be put up, and it says on the premises at which the therapist is employed. Posted could be considered in a public place, but I was wondering if we could add in line 235, after the comma, thereof, comma, in public view on the premises at which the therapist is employed, ensuring that someone can see it, for sure.
All right,
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Strawn.
One of mine was exactly that, asking about the posting in a public view. And then the other was just about the 8 AM start time. If there was something, just, it's not uncommon for doctor's offices or other establishments to actually start at 7 AM when people are working. And so I was just curious to know if there was something specifically that magic hour of 8 AM.
Councilmember Strawn, not exactly. We're really replicating what was in the code before and the restrictions and the hours. We just kind of reversed it, the
Okay.
way it said it. So we kept the same span of hours. I suppose 8 AM is considered more office hours. I understand your point about the medical situation. So we didn't give any thought to it beyond just keeping what we've always had.
Okay.
Yeah, we may want to look at that. Councilman Strawn, other questions or items?
That's all.
Okay.
Oh, I guess I do want to know if we've learned anything about the state, where they're at with that.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to check today, but when I checked last week, it still has not had a committee hearing, so I think it's probably, if you follow what they typically do, at least have a hearing to get included into omnibus bill. You need to have a hearing. There was not a hearing, so it does not look like it's going to be put in the omnibus bill. I've been kind of tracking the health on this bill, I don't see it in there as well. I have not reached out directly to the senator's office yet, but I don't think it's going to be included, but we'll continue to monitor that. And if they do, great, and that will help us tremendously, but right now, we don't expect it to be passed in this session.
Thank you.
The other item I just remembered that was brought up by a member of the public was the notion of the 600 hours of training and whether that had to be at a single institution. So we may want to, if we haven't had a chance to think about that yet, revisit that item as well. If we do want to change that, just want to make sure we're reflective of those observations from our last discussion. If there aren't any other questions from the council right now for staff, we'll provide an opportunity for public comment. Don't see any other questions. So once again, just to quickly outline the protocols for public comment, as noted earlier, we do a 3-minute time limit per speaker. We ask that you say your name and address or street for the record at the beginning of your comments. Address your comments or questions to the council and not to other staff or other members of the audience. And we'll be responsive to those questions to the extent we can following public comment. We have the 3-minute time limit. I'll enforce it as gently and generously as I can. The other piece that I didn't mention before was that if you do have a name that may not be obvious for spelling purposes for the public record, once you're finished with your comments, if you want to just step off to the side and write your name on the clipboard up there at the table while the next person is speaking, that will be great. All right, we'll open it up then for public comment on these proposed changes to the licensing requirements for massage therapy establishments and therapists. Hello and welcome.
What was that?
Hello and welcome. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Sean Blodgett. I live on South McCarran's Boulevard in Roseville, and I have my private practice in Little Canada as a traditional naturopath. I have been in this industry professionally for over 14 years and over 2 decades of education in this field. I am currently the chair of the advisory board for the Integrative Health and Healing degree program at Anoka-Ramsey Community College. I have also taught natural health classes at Normandale College, been on the editorial board for a yoga magazine, and a columnist for Natural Awakenings, Twin Cities, and Edge magazines. These opinions are my personal opinions, not necessarily that of the board that I'm the chair of or other organizations I'm currently part of or in the past. I state this to give an idea of my understanding of the wide breadth of what could possibly be considered massage, not just the limited scope being allowed under the city code. While I sent a longer email earlier detailing the links, while yes, we do typically think of massage as Western or Asian massage like Swedish, shiatsu, and sports, I feel it's important that some things that could fall under massage detailed in my email might be First Amendment right violations, as there are many spiritual, cultural, and religious practices not being acknowledged or allowed, hence barred under the city code without having a burdensome license. Some other issues with the proposed law changes in 309.03 does not allow for naturopathic doctors, which are registered, not licensed, in the state of Minnesota, or traditional naturopaths to utilize massage techniques, even though this is completely within their scope of practice. Under 309.06b, you are requiring massage therapists to produce a photo ID upon demand by a police officer, yet 2 things. Wouldn't that be a violation of the Fourth Amendment unless the officer has a reasonable suspicion of a crime? Next, it is very common knowledge that minorities are told over and over and over again and coached not to show an ID to a officer. Next, why are we even burdening the Roseville Police Department with enforcing this when massage therapy is already regulated under Minnesota Statute 146A? That law actually offers more consumer protections than of the current or proposed Roseville law. In the state regulation, practitioners must provide a client bill of rights detailing educational background, giving more credibility than any license would, and how to report complaints to the Minnesota Department of Health. The state law already outlines personal interactions and that clients have the right to expect courteous treatment free from verbal, physical, or sexual abuse. Is it fiscally responsible for the city to be burdened with the expense of this when it already has that provided on the state side? The city code is meant to have a strict enforcement of massage, yet does not actually meet that objection. Some things that could be added are things like that Minneapolis has done on the business licensure side. Things like requiring a site plan, a business plan, bank records with explanation of source of funds, tax records, information of each partner of the business, samples of advertising materials, and more. Those are things that are used to detect possible issues of human trafficking and prostitution not included in the Roseville City Code. Additionally, Minneapolis does not place unneeded burdens on the therapist and relies on 146A to regulate the therapist's side, as it likely does not meet the criteria of regulation of Minnesota Statute 214.001, Subdivision 2, Paragraph 1 and 3, and hence likely why it has not been licensed on the state side for the last 20 plus years that it's been attempted. It's failed that test every time on the state side, and it seems the state finds that the 146A is more effective and hence fully regulated. As such, the Roseville City Code it seems to attempt to preempt and does not complement or further the law, but ignores and conflicts with 146A, which does in fact regulate massage statewide. So I thank you for your time, and I do have one addition that I noticed on the exemptions that you don't have up there that is actually on state law, which is 471.709, massage therapist license. And so you'll want to check that out because that does offer specific exclusions for massage therapists under the direction of a doctor or other licensed professional.
All right, and you're at 4 minutes, so
Okay.
we'll have to wrap up at this point. Thank
Totally.
you. Appreciate it.
That's why I had typed out.
All right. Very good. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak to the proposed changes at this time? Feel free to have a seat at the other chair. And once again, if you could start by introducing yourself.
My name is Jennifer Cunningham, and my establishment is at 2191 Snelling Avenue North. I guess I'd say more questions. First of all, if we have an establishment and we are, I'm a sole establishment person. If I am using my establishment personally, and then I would need to hire in someone else if I'm going to be going out to do an off-site location, would I be able to hire someone out to do that? Because I know we're trying not to expand our units. Does that make sense? Would I be able to do that, something like that, number one? Number two, I've got clients now who are no longer able to come in to see me because they're elderly, and I have actually 2 clients who are now going into hospice, and they still want to have massage, and I want to know now, because you're saying that I can't go out to do that, am I going to be able to go to take care of them in hospice? You know, if in this rule it says I can't be done at home, well, it's not necessarily medical, it's just they want to be comfortable in their end of life stage, and if it passes this, I won't be able to do that. And what was the other one? Oh, the medically directed one, I've already got the ability to do that because I do my Form 1500, so that's it. Those are the only 2 things.
Right.
Questions on, so
Thank you
you
for
can
those
help me maybe
questions.
answer that after.
We'll try to get answer for you on that.
Yes, thank you.
All right, any other public comment on the proposed changes to 309 this evening? Any hands raised from members of the public?
Nobody's in.
Participating? Okay, all right. We'll close the opportunity for public comment then, and thank everybody once again for participating this evening as well as in the past. So we have a number of questions and issues that were raised. I think the first one is that anyone who is performing massage therapy in an establishment in Roseville would have to have a massage therapist license from the city. So hiring additional people or bringing somebody in to sort of cover for you, that person would have to be licensed, as I understand it as well. So that. I think we have to talk a little bit about, I can see where potentially, especially if you're allowed to do medically directed already through a process and something is medically directed, you should be able to do that. I think we got to talk about this whole notion of whether it has to be done in a medical establishment. We'll figure that out. But I do think that we do want to restrict the provision of commercial massage therapy for non-medical purposes to massage therapy establishments. And I think the primary purpose of that is that otherwise it becomes very difficult to regulate that activity. But we probably have to have some more conversation about that as well. But certainly if it's medically directed, and I think in hospice care, I can imagine a medical professional directing massage for their patient for a medical purpose, even if it isn't necessarily, strictly speaking, rehabilitation, because of the fact that the medically directed activity is already exempted from the licensing requirements. And so that should allow that to happen, I believe, unless I'm mistaken with that. Don't
He's looking at you.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I do.
Mayor, I think that's a better question for a doctor. But yes, I believe that if a doctor were to prescribe a massage, whether that be for rehabilitative or mental health or comfort, that if it were at the direction of a doctor, that would meet the requirements of the ordinance.
Okay. And would not require a licensed individual to do that, because it's one of the exceptions.
I think she wants to be licensed and do it. She's not worried about the licensing.
Right.
She's just
It's
worried
more
about the-
family members who are asking me to come in because the family, I was doing it and they want, she still wants you to come in there to massage
They-
her,
they-
that's why.
Yeah, it may have to be medically directed.
Okay,
Yeah.
then I'll tell them.
Feel free if you have.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that the odd legal analysis would be, since you don't have to have a license to provide a massage under doctor's care, that even though you do have a license, if a doctor orders it, you would be able to provide that massage.
Then
It's
I'll
simply
just tell them.
unrelated to your massage license.
Then I'll just tell them to get a doctor's okay, and that's what I'll do. Thanks.
That's probably the best approach in a lot of cases anyway, talk to a doctor. Councilmember Schroeder.
I think we want to be careful and not just say a doctor. I think it needs to be
Yeah.
medical, because a lot
Thank
of
you.
times in
Thank you.
hospice, you might have a nurse
Right, right.
practitioner.
And we already addressed that in our language.
Yeah, but I
for
know
our
we're kind of
exceptions, so.
talking about the doctor piece, so I
You know,
just want to clarify
And
that.
and that does actually get me to, well, I'll set that aside for a moment because we did have other questions that were raised. So the 146A, and pardon me if I mispronounce, but naturopathic type practitioners. I had a little conversation with our attorney during the break just to make sure we were sort of prepared to talk to that. So I'll actually ask Ms. Tierney to talk a little bit about how 146A relates to all of this and where we're at with any need to make reference to that in our licensing scheme.
I'm just going to go, thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm just going to go back to a little bit of a fundamental, which is obviously the state law preempts any city law. Cities cannot have laws that are directly in conflict with the state law. And in this case, if you even go to the website for the Minnesota Department of Health, it talks about how this regulation, the naturopathic, the unlicensed regulation by the state, is not in conflict with city regulations, city licensing regulations, but rather the city licenses are subject to those state requirements as well. So if the city were to, for example, pass a law that said you didn't have to follow state regulations, that would be preempted. But in this case, there isn't a conflict and they operate together.
All right, thank you. Stand by because there are a couple other questions. One of them was related to First Amendment type massage. And first of all, I guess I presume that if it's not being offered for sale under the First Amendment, that probably doesn't require a license anyway because we're regulating a commercial activity. But in any other sense, I mean, do we have concern here with respect to First Amendment type massage?
Mayor, council members, it's hard for me to answer such a general question, but what I will say is that even under the First Amendment, when we're talking about expressive activity and city regulation, we start at the beginning, which is what kind of expression it is and what is the context of that restriction. So where my brain first goes in this question is whether this would be some sort of a time, place, and manner restriction, because I'm pretty sure that massages don't take place in a traditional public forum. So to the extent that they did take place in a traditional public forum under where your venue is, the city could still regulate with sufficient reasons. But I don't think that the city is regulating the forum. I think rather the city is regulating as in its police power, as a health regulation, and in general, First Amendment activities aren't implicated. That said, provided that the city didn't enforce intentionally a regulation to limit speech, I think the city will be okay. But that will be something that would have to come to us, and we would need to look at it for the particular situation. Such a general statement is hard to speak to directly.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to this one in relation to the requirement to present an ID to the enforcement official. I believe, well, certainly the Fourth Amendment protects unreasonable search and seizure. I believe, once again, as part of our policing powers for health and safety, the exchange that you have with the people that get the license is that they can be required to provide that information as a condition of the license. Am I right about that?
Exactly, Mayor. I mean, the reason would be to make sure that the individual who's engaged in the licensed activity at that moment was the individual who's on the license.
Thank you. I think that addressed those questions that came up. Certainly, we can decide if we want to go to add requirements that might be in other cities' licensing setups, and we can either do that as part of this or at any other time. I don't know that I have an answer as to whether we need to do that. Councilmember Strong.
I just, my understanding is that we already have this in place, and we are adjusting amendments and adjustments. Is that not correct?
Yeah, we have a licensing scheme in place, right? We're trying to tighten it up a little
A couple
bit.
folks have mentioned, if this goes into effect, where actually it is in effect, we are talking about adjustments and amendments to an existing structure within the city. So just for clarification.
Yeah, thank you. I think that addressed comments and questions that were brought up during public comment here. Now, to the one thing I did want to talk about, we talked about it changing our exception number 2 in 309, and I don't know if you can bring that language back up. But I think actually we do still have a little bit of a problem with it here. And that is the reference to being licensed by the Board of Medical Practice. And that is because actually when you look at some of the different types of practices that are listed there, they are actually licensed by specific boards for those practices, such as physical therapy. There's a board for, and I was just double checking the language in state statutes about that because I wanted to be sure. We may want to change it to say something to the effect of licensed by a board governing the practice, their medical practice, a state board governing their medical practice. And we may actually then want to look at going back to listing specific practices like we do there. I know there was some talk about taking those out at one point. And maybe that's why those are back in, is because, there are boards and there are licensing setups that are irrelevant to sort of massage therapy. And so some of those don't apply. But I think the language as it's written here, if we just change it to by a state board regulating that practice or something to that effect, covers it. Because once again, the Board of Medical Practice is specific to doctors. Councilmember Strong.
Would we want to ensure that it says a Minnesota State Board?
Well, I think it's sort of, because we're in Minnesota, everybody knows that, but I'll defer to Ms. Tierney on that.
In other states could exist or not exist?
Well,
or
I
be
think if we said
completely different?
under the state board, the state is implied to be Minnesota, but once again, I'll defer to our attorney if we need to be more specific.
She's reading.
I'm reading in the Department of Health. I think that when I wrote this, the other licenses all fell under the Department of Health actually is the issuing authority.
Okay.
But for medical doctors, it is actually the Board of Medical Practice who is the issuing authority.
Okay.
And that's why I singled out the Board of Medical Practice. And I
Gotcha.
can't, of course, now find the statute.
Okay, so
But
if it is,
it was the Department of Health is where the license comes from. And it isn't that for medical doctors.
okay. And I like the fact that we still list the practices here, unless we don't.
Well, no, we don't. I think I meant to strike that out. I was putting this together pretty quick this afternoon. So
It was stricken from the language
yeah,
in
so
the
if you look at
packet.
attachment C,
Yeah.
which is the clean version, it all that stuff is removed, all that specific language, and the reference to 147 and 148.
But if in fact all those practices are, in fact, issued licenses by the Department of Health, then we may not have to list them again.
Yeah, that was the thought.
Right. I think we just want to be completely clear one way or the other on that.
So just to be clear,
If we want to be extra careful, I suppose we could say licensed by the Department of Health and list those specific practices. Then we might have to amend those practices later, but
Yeah,
but that's where our code had read was, I think, that they were listed. so-
That's right.
Okay.
Attachment C, which is the clean
Yep,
version,
yep.
does not include that language, just to be clear.
Got it. Right. Anything else that we have to deal with? I guess the other thing is the notion of striking out that requirement that the treatment be administered on the premises of a medical or health business, which apparently, even though that's under our exemptions, doesn't seem to allow that exempted behavior to happen in people's homes. Are we okay with striking out that it has to be on a medical premises?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Then that resolves that. All right, we got rid of the transfer altogether. We want to look at adding the in public view on 309.06A, a copy thereof in public view. Everybody following, tracking that? And then on 309.06B, we can either leave any police officer in or just replace that with city enforcement official,
Or as.
or have an
What's
or.
in C?
C,
Or does-
issuing authority or
Here,
designating.
under C, how it's listed,
Yeah,
right here, under
that's
C,
better wording.
or designated and/or city
Issuing
police.
authority or designee. Okay,
Isn't
so
it the same?
upon the demand of
Same as good.
the issuing authority or designee or the city police department, actually it would have to be a representative of the issuing authority or designee or the city police department, because
Yep.
the authority doesn't ask for the license, the
Yeah,
representative
so
does.
that should actually be changed in C and then copied into B. A representative of the issuing authority or designee under the police.
Okay,
In
so,
C, so we should add your language.
so in C, just to
There.
get it, it should be inspection : a representative of the issuing authority,
Yeah,
Right,
et cetera, et
and
cetera.
then take all that and put it in B.
And then
put it in B.
in B, it would be upon demand of a representative of the issuing
Yes.
authority or designee or the police
Yep.
department,
Yes.
and like that. Everybody tracking?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Councilmember
Okay,
Shaw.
so I have a whole nother situation so in light of Ms. Tierney's comment about being in public, what about the folks who are in the middle of the Rosedale Mall providing supposedly massage?
Well, this was specific to the First Amendment aspect.
Right, but what about those, are they under any, are they
If-
held to any of these requirements?
If somebody is, you're saying like at a kiosk in Rosedale providing massage therapy?
Yeah, there's like
They have
chairs
to
in the
be
middle
licensed
of.
by the city if they're getting
Have
charged
to be
there.
displayed.
Yep,
Okay,
yep, same requirements.
okay.
Yeah.
So we just, I'm not sure, how we go about, because I don't know if there's, there's probably a lot of folks who are not aware of that. Obviously, the mall was not aware of some other things that were going on before, so.
Well, presumably, if they're providing massage for a charge, which is really the requirement for the license,
They need a
I guess if
Then we're
you're
gonna tell
not
them.
charging people for it,
No.
technically
If they're
speaking.
performing the services, they need to have a license.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's not
Okay.
about a charge.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? And Mr. Trudgeon, did we include a ordinance summary in?
Did.
Excellent.
Yep. The attachment is one of the last attachments.
All right, so we have then the question as to whether we want to adopt the ordinance with the amendments that we've discussed this evening, presuming that staff has tracked all of that.
So,
All right.
Ms. Tierney's getting her money's, or we're getting our money's
Yeah.
worth or something.
I don't see steam coming off the computer yet, so that's good. All right. Is there a motion from the council then as it relates to the ordinance adopting the changes to Title III, Chapter 309,
So
related to
moved.
massage therapy?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Ratten, and we're talking about as amended in the discussions this evening. All right, discussion of the motion. As the maker of the motion, Councilmember Schroeder.
I think we've had plenty of discussion.
Point taken. As the seconder, Councilmember Ratten.
Here, here.
All right, any other discussion about our discussion to point to so far? All right, there's no other discussion. We have the motion before us to adopt the ordinance as amended this evening. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Second, we have the need to do an ordinance summary in order to publish a summary of the ordinance and not spend a lot of money to put the whole ordinance in the newspaper. And that requires a supermajority, which in this case is 4/5 of the council. Is there a motion to adopt the summary?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, second by Councilmember Schroeder, to approve the publication of the summary. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, meeting the 4/5 supermajority requirement. Thank you once again to everybody who's been involved in this process, and we look forward to a smooth licensing season on the part of all of our staff and all of our establishments and therapists in Roseville this evening, or this coming couple months here. With that, then, we'll move to our next item, which is to kind of do a recap and after-event discussion of our recent commission interview and appointment and reappointment process. And I believe, Mr. Trudgeon, you are also introducing this item, so I'll turn it over to you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So we'll talk a little bit about the commission interview process. We have included a lot of information in there. And we really want to foster a discussion about what worked, what didn't work, and why maybe we should look at doing things differently or keep them the same. So as just as a way of brief background, as described in the staff report, one of the goals of the Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan, or the SREAP, was to improve commission member diversity. As you will recall, for those that were here in January 2022, staff did come forward with recommendations on how to improve the commission interview process, with the idea of a better process would lead to more diverse commission. After the council discussion, feedback, and direction, staff made changes to the process centered around recruitment, interviewing, and onboarding. The RCA explains each change that was made and lists the reasons why they were implemented, what we're trying to do. I would pause there for a second. The why part is something that we need to make sure that we kind of consider. Oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this all the time, you go right to a solution without thinking about what are we trying to solve and why we're trying to do things. So just a gentle reminder just to kind of keep that in mind as we go through it. So tonight we would encourage the council to discuss those changes that have been made, how from your perspective, because you are obviously a very important stakeholder in this whole process, and how it works for you and what you think is good and bad about it. We have included feedback from surveys from people that have applied for that, and we have a lot of detailed information on there, but some pretty interesting information. I think overall the applicants trended that they felt the process was better than it was before from 2019. It's a very limited sample size, of course, but it seems like the changes have been fairly positive for them at the very least. Finally, I would just say that we can talk about anything here, of course, but we do call out a couple things specifically that I know have come up from council members directly or indirectly to me. One is about the reappointment process, how to handle the reappointment applications themselves, as well as the interviews, whether they should be automatic or something that's still at the discretion of the council. The location of the interviews, perhaps the dates, the length of the interviews. You see some of those come out that they wish it was maybe longer, the applicants, I should say, and then the whole recording of the commission interviews. The interview questions always comes up as well, so we should have a conversation around that. And then the selection process is, we've struggled with extending the application period for a longer period of time, if that's something we want to continue, and that is in regards to our appointment policy. And then if you want to talk about any desired qualifications, and the only reason we bring that up is there's been some comments about the applicant's not sure what qualifications the council is looking for. Ultimately, each of you are going to approach it very differently, and so maybe it's hard to pin that down, but we thought we should at least be reactive to that and have a conversation with that. So with that in mind, we open it up for discussion and questions, and I have Rebecca here as well and Rachel there as well to help guide us through any questions that you may have, and we're all ears, so we'll go from there.
Right, and it may make sense to organize our discussion into sort of the different steps of the process, if that makes sense. And certainly, the first step of the process is sort of that application process. And then there's the interviewing process. I think, well, those are kind of the main 2 points of it, I guess, and we can talk more about those specifically, individual sub-steps within that. I think in the application process, to me, it does make sense to have a separate application for reappointment that specifically gets to questions that relate to reappointment, rather than considering especially somebody who may have been appointed for a partial term and then has served a full term, and so their application material is 4 years old or 5 years
Yes.
old. It doesn't really make sense to look at that as being relevant or completely relevant to the reappointment process. So I don't know, is there any objection from the council in terms of looking at having a specific application for reappointment? All right, doesn't
Okay.
seem to be. My suggestion would be that we look at the questions that we used during the interview process for reappointment this time, noting that although there's 3 numbers next to the questions, I think we determined through the process that there was actually probably 4 questions in there. So we may want to look at that, and obviously it's probably appropriate if the staff wants to develop a draft application and bring it back for council consideration.
Yes.
That's at least maybe a starting point.
And that you're referring to what's in the packet, the attachments that designated
Attachment
Mayor Rose.
H, I think?
Yeah, and use those as the basis for the
Yeah, as a starting
application.
point, certainly, and there may be other things
Yep.
that staff thinks are appropriate to either carry forward from the main application or to add and enhance, just based on experience of commissioners and liaisons and whomever is in the process. All right? So that's sort of the application process, yes.
Oh, I think in the application process, especially for reappointment, it'd be nice, obviously separate questions. Maybe kind of that internal applicant thing where it's a little bit shorter, and maybe speak to what they learned or their highlights or
Right,
things, really, but I don't think they need to go back to square one. We could have maybe both.
Like with the resume and all that kind of
Right,
stuff.
right, just really, especially
Shorten that up.
as the HR person on the internal, I try to make that, applying for an internal position to be half the time or less of a new appointment. So just so that someone, but we still have a more clear idea of what they've gotten out of it, why they want to come back. I feel like some of that, then we would have more time for some of the meaty questions, like, what do you think we should do in this situation or whatever? We can be more, and we can have more situations and discussion.
Okay. Councilmember Schroeder,
Well, I'm looking at the procedure statement of reappointments in our actual document here. It says that if you want to reapply, they should, the most recent applicant be older than 3 years, they'll be asked to submit a new application. So what if they've only served 2?
perhaps we might want to amend that a little bit. I
I'm
think
just saying, I
any
know, but,
reapplication,
so they're kind
right,
of hand
yep.
in hand.
So
Yes.
also
So-
look at the policy is, I guess, what we need to do.
Yeah.
Always a good rule.
And I think that gets maybe to the next thing about sort of that, the application process related to if we don't have 2 times the number of openings worth of applicants. Obviously, we always have the option to not reopen it. I think we've tried to reopen it to be as consistent as possible with past practice. Does it make sense to look at the policy and maybe amend it a little bit to be, instead of 2 times the number of applicants, to be, 2 more than the number of vacancies? I mean, obviously, if there's,
One vacancy.
then it's
Yeah.
3. But if there's 4 vacancies, we don't have to get 8 people
Yeah.
necessarily. I mean, or 1 or 2 more, or, 2 more if it's less than X, and 1 more if it's greater than X, or something like that. I mean, we could get really crazy with it if we
Yeah,
wanted to.
could
but,
have a whole math problem.
but I just want to give ourselves some more flexibility there, instead of necessarily always feeling like we're sort of boxed in, that we have to have, especially given the situation we had this time around, where we had additional vacancies occur in the course of the
In the
appointment process, which really started making the math difficult to track. I mean, I suppose one could technically say, there was actually not that many vacancies at the start of the process, so we only need X number of applicants, and we don't necessarily consider additional vacancies that arise as part of our calculus there, but maybe we do want to do that. I don't know. I struggle with that piece of it, but maybe just slightly relaxing our standard might make some sense. Thoughts from the council on that?
I feel like the council has the discretion to do that if needed.
So it's so right.
That we have,
Well, I understand that.
that we have 4 openings in a commission is pretty rare, unfortunate and rare. So thinking we need 8 people is going to, and we did waive in the end, we did say, okay, we have to move on, we have some great people here, let's appoint them and fill out this commission, right? So I think we have nuanced that already, so I'm not ready to get into special calculations and, I don't know, engineering design for buildings over 6 stories versus 2
No, I
stories.
definitely understand that. I just wanted to make sure we had the chance to talk about that if we did want to
Okay.
update our policy, because I certainly, and it's a good point, we don't have 4 vacancies all the time on a commission. That's pretty
pretty rare.
unusual, yeah. But it does certainly make it challenging if we try to expect 8 people to apply
Yes.
for, we'll have to use our discretion then. Our future councils will use their discretion in that regard. So that's the application process. Anything on the application or the sort of the front end of the process? Councilman Bratton?
I would like, and I don't think this is in here, the questions in the application itself for new commission
Do we have a
people
copy of the
applying
application?
changed from a year ago. And I would like to compare those questions. I can't remember what it is anymore, but there's a question that used to be in there that I found very helpful when people were answering it, and the questions changed. And so I don't necessarily dislike any of the questions that are in there, but there was a question. If we happen to have someone who applied, it was the people who were reapplying, so we had their
Yeah.
forms from 3-4 years ago and went, I like this. And so I would like to look back, I would like to compare those, and I'm sorry I didn't do that research, but
So what we could do is maybe when the draft reapplication, or reappointment application comes back, we could also have both the old and the new.
this is for new applicants.
No, I understand
Okay,
that, but
all
at
right,
the same
all right.
time, it might be a good time to
Fair
look
enough.
at that, and that would give staff time to bring it
Yes,
forward together
thank you.
and stuff, rather than trying to go through it this evening.
Yes.
Councilman?
Could we have it that it was maybe 4 total questions or something, even if not all of us got through, just to keep.
Well,
in
this
the
isn't for the
interest of
interview
time?
We're talking
questions,
about
this is for the application.
The online application.
Okay.
The application
In
at
that-
the beginning of
okay.
the process.
But I thought you meant about the interview
No,
itself.
We'll get to that,
Okay,
certainly,
perfect.
but yeah, this is for the application, yeah. So that's a good point and is worth taking a look at, just to make sure. Since we're looking at the new application for reappointment, we might as well just review the existing application and compare to the previous for appointment.
I would also appreciate having Assistant City Manager Olson on the application process, as far as making sure the questions would be something that would be appropriate to ask a job applicant. There are certain things when in a job application that you really shouldn't ask someone, because that information could be seen as discriminatory if you did not, they could say, well, you didn't hire me because you knew I had this, that, or the other thing. So really maybe making sure that we're being respectful and asking kind of best practice questions. And so I really would, I don't know. that
On the
just seems-
interview, or on the application.
in the application
Yeah.
process. If it's not something that we would ask of a job applicant that, or that, and often it's not, it's just how it's nuanced, so that it's appropriate, and so we're not asking information, because then we have some private information in our state. I have some maybe personal information that maybe, I don't know, somebody shared that was maybe a little bit outside of what information I should have, and suddenly I have kind of something personal, maybe about a disability or something that is protected confidential information in any other realm, so.
That's something we can take a look at. Right, so that's the application process. Maybe the only other thing related to that is if we want to look at any kind of change to our policy as it relates to the process to get to interviewing reapplication people. The current policy is that if 2 people on the council wish to have the reapplication people, any individual, it's worded as any individual reapplication person interviewed, then that person would be interviewed. Do we want to look at any changes to that policy at this point? Just bringing it up since it's part of the topic. Otherwise, we can leave it as is.
My only comment is that if it is done at that stage, when it's done, it can be fairly disruptive to get everybody. We went through it, so we learned some lessons there, but it can be fairly disruptive to do that. So part of me says, if you think you're going to want to occasionally do that, maybe just make that automatic so we can build that into.
Yeah, I
The
think we
process?
have to decide if we want to always do it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then I guess, you know, I keep going back to the why, you know, why would we want to do it or not do it a certain way?
Councilman McGrath.
The reason why I would want to do it is, as a council member, I value these people's opinions, and we don't have very much interaction with them. I know we could call them and do all that, but it's my one chance in the 2 or 4 years, whatever, to connect with them and also give them a chance to talk to us, as Councilmember Strong was saying, about what their experience has been on there. Because if we leave these groups functioning so much out on their own without us interacting, we really lose touch with that process. And so that's my reason for liking that process. And I didn't think it took us that much longer. I mean, I know it's a little more work for staff, but I didn't think it took us that much longer. And I thought it actually went quite smoothly this time. That was my opinion anyway. So I valued that information.
All right. Other thoughts from council members on whether we want to just go ahead and require interviews for all reapplicants? Councilman Brad?
I appreciate that viewpoint, Mr. Groff. I was stuck with your first name, and then I got, all right, Councilmember Groff.
Yeah.
And I think there can be value to that. I don't personally want to make it an automatic.
I don't.
And so I wouldn't want to make that part of our code that people have to come in and interview again, especially if we have a reappointment questionnaire, as we're discussing here, that helps get some of that information. And if we say, hey, we're going to need more, that's a different discussion at that point where 2 people can bring it up. But I wouldn't want it to be automatic. But I do appreciate getting the additional information that is being suggested for a separate application for the reapplication process.
Mayor? I agree. I wouldn't want to have it automatic all the time, because each time it's a different scenario. But I just know from having served on commissions, you can easily feel really isolated from the council. And when you have those opportunities like once a year to come in, that helps. But even that one-on-one thing, I think, would have been really helpful for me serving on the Human Rights Commission or even on the Planning Commission. So you can talk about what your experience has been and what your issues have been that came up. Of course, it can be in an email or something, but for me, I learn better personally when I have interaction with people than I do in emails.
Councilman Schroeder.
Yes, and I thought it was useful to be able to talk to the people too. I just want to be really sensitive to letting people know why we're doing
Yes.
it. I didn't want people to get the impression, well, we think we might find better people than you, so we're interviewing you. You know, so I think that's the messaging, how we communicate this. You know, so I agree, I don't think we want automatic, but if we do it, we gotta really think about how we communicate why we're doing it. Because that's, you know, I did have some people think, well, you know, don't you think I'm doing a good job, or what the
Exactly.
deal is, and so you don't want that,
No.
so.
Although at the same time, it's easier to ask everyone to come back than to say 1 or 2 persons, because those people will definitely feel singled out. So the reason behind having everyone come back was, we had a lot of people, we're coming out of a time when everyone felt super civic engaged, and they all wanted to be involved, and we had tons of applications, to not having that connection and not having tons of openings and kind of having to reevaluate. I think it's helpful to have as an option if we feel we need to, but I don't think that it probably has happened too many times or too regularly. So I think, but, you know, the reason that you call might not be something that you can share, because it's not something that every person needs to know, because it maybe isn't about you, but I don't want to get up in front of everyone and go, it's because of this person. So, you know, I guess just in the interest of our goal is to make well-run, well-functioning committees, and it's not necessarily on, you just, I don't know. I would hope that there's an intent of trust, that the goal is to be better, and that the goal isn't to be punitive. And I would hope that we would all be able to at least come to the point that it wasn't about any one person, any one way. And the fact that it turned into something where someone felt convicted, you know, they were under the gun. Well, they didn't have the whole story, and it wasn't their place to have the whole story, because it wasn't about that person even. So I think it's really important, you know, the information was shared with the appropriate people, but not every person even sitting at this table knows why. And it wasn't all everybody's place to know. So I think it's appropriate to have the information when need be. I don't think it should be automatic. I think it's a lot of work and not everyone wants or needs to be, but I think it should be able to be an option if it needs to be. There are times and people in different situations who need to be moved along for a variety of reasons, or for what, it could just be so many different things. I think we need to reserve that right to have that option, but I don't think it should happen every time, just automatic.
Right. And that's the way it's set up right now, is that it's the option. Great. I think that gets us through then sort of that initial process. I think the next big topic is the interview process. And we, I think, have gone through it a couple of times now and have some thoughts, I'll just put it that way. So I'll turn it over to the council to perhaps bring those thoughts in to the conversation. Councilmember Bratton.
One of the questions, and I think that we made this decision together during the interview, so this may already be there, but one of the questions that was proposed was, what do you believe should be the focus of the commission? And ideally, and we'll talk about this more later, but ideally there's already a scope for the commission, so we're not really asking that, but rather, I think I'd suggested in the meetings something along the lines of, what part of the work of this commission most excites you, or do you feel you can contribute to the most? Something along those lines that gets to the work of the commission, so people can show understanding of what that commission does, and maybe what they're passionate about and why they would be doing that, versus asking, what should the commission be doing?
Right.
So that's just a question thing. I appreciate the potential question list. I think that is good. I don't feel like we always need to be frozen by that, but we should start with that as our initial framing. And just that question, I would want to adjust a little bit.
And that's the fourth one on the list.
It was the fourth one on the list, yeah. And I think we actually put that in practice in our interviews in March. We just wanted to say it out loud
Right.
here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we always try not to ask the questions as yes or no questions too. I just noticed that the third one is, can you explain?
Yeah.
That's a yes or no question, so we
Right.
should.
Just say
Please
explain.
explain
Please
or
explain.
understand.
Describe,
Yes,
give an
Yes, I
example.
can explain, but I'm not going.
Yeah, that's,
Well, that's a different thing.
then.
Yes.
That's why you're not appointed.
Mayor.
No.
Yeah.
I think I fully agree with Councilmember Etten on to show their understanding. I think it's really nice in sending out the information in advance. People have an opportunity to look into what things actually do and don't have happen on that commission. And to me, it is concerning when someone is asked that question and they draw a huge blank and they don't know anything about what the commission does, or they have a completely backwards, well, we are the liaison to the community of all, and it's like, oh, whoa, 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 like, there's like, that you're the liaison to the council, and so a good understanding, and maybe even like a description, but I appreciate so much when people have done their homework and they know what we do and they understand how they would fit inside of that parameter. One question that did come up a couple times this last time that I found concerning was, what would you change in the park, or what would you change? Because I don't want to usurp the leadership of the department heads and make it seem like somehow there's an authority over the staff to make changes that they couldn't actually implement. So I think maybe tempering that in a way so that it wouldn't come across as, on this commission, you will get to make all these grandiose changes, and you can, I think making sure that, I don't know, just making sure they understand the sphere in which they operate, and, maybe they could have a bright idea, but make sure that it's not like, what change are you gonna make, and somehow that's what is within the realm of possibilities.
Well, and I think actually Councilman Bratton's suggestion for the fourth question gets at that sort of same information in a little bit different and probably better way, in the sense that it's, what about the commission's work excites you, or that sort of thing, as opposed to what do you want to change about the city or whatever. Yeah. That can get at that. Councilmember Schroeder.
Well, and part of this is, and I know we'll talk about this kind of straddling the two parts here, is when you look at the chapters that are written for each of the commissions, some of them aren't really clear what the commissions do. So if someone went back to research to look up, when you see that question or, about what does the commission do, and you go look at that, you can understand then why the answers are coming across somewhat the way they are, because I think that's hand in hand, we're gonna have to think about recrafting how those are written then
You
as
talked
well.
about the
The
chapter
chapters.
2
Yeah.
sections about the
Yeah.
the code for each
Yeah,
commission.
yeah, because it talks about what they do and some of them do at least. And so I think that's where you want to make sure that if they're going to research for these questions by looking at that, I think we're going to have to maybe do some work on cleaning that up a bit. And of course, that's a whole nother
That
conversation.
may actually tie into our next
Yeah,
agenda
yeah, so
item,
that's why I said I was
yeah.
straddling the two.
Right,
Yeah.
but I do think it's probably, helpful to make sure that that our materials that we give to prospective applicants are as good as we can in terms of how that relates to the scope, duties, and functions, maybe even as we understand them, even if it's not quite as it's written in the code today, because I think that can be helpful. And just a simple thing like on the sheet that's in here as an attachment that has all the interview questions, it says potential questions. I suppose it could say the heading could be potential interview questions, just to be a little more explicit as to that, but
Yeah.
whatever. It may be more obvious from the context, but I'm just like scrolling on my screen, so I'm not seeing the whole thing. Councilmember Hatton.
I would like to note to Rachel and any other staff that I think the information being given to these commissioners is a tremendous improvement. So
Yes.
Yes.
so we're talking about
Yeah,
little nuances.
Right,
This is so much.
tweaking a good improvement,
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah. This is
everything's
so
terrible.
much better than what we had a year or two ago. Even where they apply to a commission, then there's information about that commission and the QR code to see recent agenda minutes. It's handed to them to do the research if they are interested and passionate about it, and that's never been true before. So I think that's a really good improvement that's happened for sure.
I found it interesting that somebody said, I didn't know what I was being judged on, and I thought, well, okay, maybe we need to be more clear, but obviously if we hand you a packet of information, we expect you to read it. And so maybe we need to be more clear, but I think, it's a matter of, even in the 2 years that I've been on council, how much more versed people are and able to understand, and provide information that relates to what we're asking them about this commission. So I think it's a huge improvement. I really thank you for.
Yeah.
And I think that gets to the sort of the equity issue of you give everybody as much of a fair shot as you can, because you're giving people a whole lot more information than previous processes had. So I think that's great.
It's also, it's also an equity piece. If someone has a learning disability, doesn't mean they won't be a fantastic member of a commission. They just maybe need to see it in advance and have an opportunity. They can't think quickly on their feet, but they could write it all down. I've seen folks who wrote all their answers. That is perfectly acceptable. They could still be a really fine, a member. The way I was interviewed when I was younger was kind of always a gotcha, How would you get out of a refrigerator with one arm, or, I don't know.
The MacGyver question?
Yeah, so I think it's
Duct tape.
really good that they're related and that they, and that people can count on what's going to be there.
Sure. Right. So probably the big question about the interview process is the where, how, and when.
Oh, yeah.
I saw Councilmember Shorter.
Oh,
had
I
her
was just
hand up.
thinking
Maybe I was
about
just
the
anticipating.
pieces we hand out too. It does say here that they are a ambassador of the city. And it mentions they serve as ambassadors of the city and represent the interests of the city, both at official meetings as well as outside the city hall. Again, I think, is that what we want to tell people, is that,
I think that's a part of it.
is
sure.
that,
Yeah, absolutely.
that piece of it, so.
They become appointed by the city council,
So-
yes.
Yeah.
And then they have certain things, responsibilities and expectations.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that piece.
They even have a background check, which we don't.
When they're on a
Okay.
commission that has youth commissioners, to be
Which
honest.
is almost anyone now.
Yeah.
Yep, no, just wanted to
Right.
verify that one.
Right, venue, video, live or not, all those good questions. I did think it was interesting that one person had observed, and I always hate to make policy based on one observation,
Yes,
but
not a good.
Correct.
the observation that that particular individual anyway thought that it was rather intrusive to have the video camera on the tripod in the room with us.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's kind of a good point, because I guess in this place the camera is much more less likely to be seen, or more discreet. Thank you. So that I could see where that could be an issue. And then we obviously have our council rules about live broadcast of meetings and things like that, so we have to get to that. So, council discussion. Who wants to dive in? Councilmember,
I really
Strand.
enjoy being at Cedar Home, but it has a lot to do with my saying that we have all of these city spaces and we have an opportunity to go out into the spaces and be a part of. But I do think in that space then, we have an opportunity to, I think it should generally be recorded, just because all of us being there with the chair has been rather infrequent, especially if someone has applied for multiple commissions. It just hasn't been possible that all the people are there at the same time. I'll defer to someone else on whether or not that needs to be public for anyone else's purpose. I think it's been good to pull it out of our city business. I feel like we give people more dedicated time than when we were on Zoom and we were running into the meeting, and if we were running late, really late, it just felt like, I think that probably contributed to some of the people feeling really just kind of pushed off. So I appreciate the extra day outside of the time, although those are rough weeks. But thankfully, they're not too frequent. And I don't know, I like having it elsewhere, just because it just shows that I think the Oval was a little harder, just because it was tucked in a way, whereas the Cedar Home is just right inside the door. But I think it kind of reminds people that, this is also one of our city buildings, and there's also other pieces to it. Other people walking by are like, oh, I don't know. It just feels like we're part of the community. Often we get to this ivory tower thing where we're just in here and the rest of the people aren't kind of likely to happen by.
thoughts? Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, and I think, I like the idea that we do it separate from the meetings. I think that's really, really good. I think that makes it less stressful. I did not like going to the other locations. I thought they were loud. I thought it was confusing. That camera sitting right there in your people's face, I thought was intrusive. I guess in a way, I thought being here where their meetings are actually going to be held, if we all sat at the table here with the hidden more cameras, and so they would actually be in the environment that they would be doing if they get appointed. They get a kind of a flavor for that seemed. And again, it was just really loud, and I'm sitting on the end, I'm having a hard time hearing the interview, and, it just seemed almost disrespectful to people that, there's just all this other stuff going on versus why don't we do it somewhere where they can have, it's quieter and they have more of a opportunity to think, and it just seems a better environment, and it just, I'm thinking about that last go around, it took them longer to set up the camera than it did to do our interviews.
The second day, yeah.
At the Oval, or?
That was
Cedar Home.
You had
at
the two
Cedar
people at
Home,
Cedar
when,
Home.
yeah, I think because that was one of
Oh,
those,
right.
yeah, and those kind of things, and so that's, I don't know, so I just think if we do it on a day other than the council meeting and sitting at the table, and because then everybody knows where to go versus, I was even like, okay, well, now where am I supposed to go, kind of thing, but that's that, and I've been on both sides. I've been applied for commissioner, and so I kind of been on both sides, and I actually, to be able to sit in a round table with people is also, I think, more inclusive, instead of having somebody there and we're all, so if we're in a round table more so, I think that just works better for me, but that's my opinion.
Other thoughts?
I have a question about that. So in that space, it was us and one candidate. If we're here in this space, does the door have to be open, and would all the candidates be able to be in here at the same time?
So I think in the past, we've done the interviews here. The candidates are out in the hall. I think The challenge we have with sort of open meeting law is you want to make the meeting place accessible for the public. So actually, even other candidates are, under the law, able to come in and be a part,
Right.
sit through the rest of the interviews if they want to. I don't think there's any way we can legally preclude that. I think the challenge we had at Cedar Home was that the folks out in the hall were kind of noisy, and so that noise came into the interview space, and that made it challenging, especially to hear. And then there was the question of, well, do we then close the door and things like that? And I think we can work through some of that. It hasn't seemed to have been an issue here as much, and we may have actually had the door closed for those.
We did.
We did, yeah.
When I'm here. Yeah, I'm trying to remember back in time, and then the staff person would sort of usher people in and out. But
Yeah.
obviously, anybody from the public can attend a public meeting, because that's what this is, a public meeting of the city council. There's nothing we can do about that under state law, which is probably a good thing. But I do kind of agree with the notion of the table. I think the thing that has been a challenge in the past when we've done them here is that it's always been on the same night as a council meeting.
Right.
And so everything is set up for the council meeting. This part is lit up, and it's all like ready to go. It's like, oh, we got to get you out of the way so we can do the business, And so definitely having a different day and time is absolutely, I think, an improvement in that. I think there's a way to do it here potentially, with just the table lit up and a little mood lighting or whatever you want to. As soon as I started to say
Yeah,
that,
where you're going.
We need scented
but we can do it in a
candles.
way that
Please,
doesn't
no.
make it so much, like it's like we want to get them out of the way for a council meeting and may it be a little more user-friendly for the applicants. And we've got the technical ability to do the video. I think frankly that because it's a council meeting and our policy is to have council meetings live, that they should be. And available, and just like any other council meeting, I don't think we should treat that any differently for the interview meetings, but I absolutely agree that it should be a separate day and time, and figure out a way to make it a little less, less of an issue in terms of being more user-friendly like the other, the other places have been in those senses. So that's my thoughts. I don't know if other council members have other additional thoughts or.
Weigh in a bit.
Sure.
I don't have strong feelings one way or the other on the location. They both have pluses and minuses, so I kind of agree with everything that's been said. The round table is probably more conducive than that square thing. I didn't have trouble with the noise in the building, but that's all different people. As far as the, I think the sound and maybe the setup here is a little better. But I really do think it's important to videotape it because that's our policy for one thing, but also I wasn't able to make one of the meetings, then I could go back and listen to it. Because like this was, that second one was planned on sort of short notice and I'd already made commitments that I couldn't change. So that's helpful as far as being on the council. Instead of videotaped.
How about live for the public and available to
I
stream?
think that's important because this is public business, so it should be out there. I mean, I don't know if that's intimidating to other people or not. I guess there was one person who said it. Is that what you said in the?
Well, they were specifically commenting about the camera on the tripod. I don't know if they knew whether or not it was live to the public or anything. They may have
I
made
think as long as
assumptions.
people know ahead of time, I think it's not it shouldn't be a big issue, just so they know the rules of the road and what's happening. I never had trouble with that when I applied before, but, everyone's different.
Sure. Councilmember Adams?
I would agree with the discussion around having it here and at the table for the reasons that have been mentioned. I think several of us have interviewed for sometimes a couple of different commissions and been through that. This is where they would do their work. Their work would be online, recorded and online. So if they were interviewing for a job at a desk down the hall, different. But they're interviewing to be representatives of the city council in the community and to come to meetings and be on tape. So, and at some point, it's just the real thing that they're going to be doing. And I think that these cameras are certainly less obtrusive than the one that was set up at a remote location, so.
The very friendly operator, but still.
He's
Very friendly operator.
yes.
Ian's great.
Councilmember Schroeder.
And just one more comment on video. Also, I do think we always talk about wanting communication and being transparent. And the, you know, if you talk about their ambassadors, then the public needs to have the right to see who is applying for this. And so I think letting the people who don't attend the meetings to be able to see the process as well, I think is important, as well as if in case someone misses a meeting or whatever. But I do think it's important that the rest of the public get the opportunity as well.
And, you know, actually, as a part of the materials we provide to applicants, we could, or potential applicants, we could even link them to the past interview video if they want to watch and see what the process is like and become familiar with it.
That'd be good.
That might help them
Good
decide
idea.
whether they want to apply or how they want to deal with it. So, and be more prepared, just in the sense of generally making people more prepared. So that might be a helpful thing. So it sounds like the council consensus is to, or there's not really objection to bringing it back here, but doing it on a separate night and also, you know, the mood lighting and stuff.
Is there a
So
problem with scheduling this room is the other thing?
I think we just have to be intentional about it. I think we try to schedule these interview dates pretty far in advance because we only do it 2 times a
But we have
year.
other commissions that meet here, so.
Right.
Yeah, well, we have a pretty, we know that schedule, so we try
Okay.
to can work around that.
We know the people.
We know the people,
All right.
people we're talking about.
Thank goodness.
All right. So that's kind of the interview. Anything else related to this that folks wanted to talk about in the process? Councilmember Strong?
One thing that would be really helpful is if the chairs would provide us information sooner about their people as far as reappointment. A lot of those were coming in like as bench handouts.
So their deadline to tell us about their impressions of their members that want to be reapplied should be something close to the reapplication deadline for those people.
I think that'd be really helpful, because that would help us determine whether or not someone should be if they're on the fence about someone,
So
maybe that would be.
So our council, our first touch on that as a council is that first meeting of the year typically in January. And I believe our application for reappointment deadline is in the previous year at some point. So it would be reasonable to expect that the chairs get their information in time for that packet for that meeting. I think we want to make sure and get that and make it clear to those chairs. That hopefully that gives them time to know who's reapplying and then be responsive.
Yeah, and things change.
And I know Ms. Olson is not so eager to come up and talk to us about that anymore. So I don't know.
Things change, but,
Yeah.
if possible, it does really help us
Right.
know how to look ahead. And one of the comments or one of the few negatives about this last process was someone saying that they didn't know what criteria they were being judged on and everything. And some of that is just understanding who's already on the council, so just like a job interview, you're not gonna likely to get the exact, well, here's why you didn't get it and here's why you did. It's gonna be, you're gonna have to just trust that 5 of us made a pretty good decision based on shared information.
And we're giving people, once again, what the commission does, what our questions are likely to be when we interview them. And obviously, they have the questions on the application. I mean, all those things are designed to give us the information that we use to make the decision. So that's kind of the criteria. I mean, I don't mean to be flip about it. Certainly, that was a concern that was raised. But that the information is available if folks.
Yeah,
want to
and the
look at it.
level of
And seeing the
experience
previous
really-
videos might be helpful, too.
Yeah, and the level of experience, no experience required. Well, a lot of people have never been on a commission. They may have other day jobs, and I'm always amazed at the people who do the same thing during the day and they want to do it at night somewhere else. But it's a combination of things. So I just don't know that that there's a set.
No.
We don't know. It's who shows up and who applies.
And trying to be complimentary with people who are already on the commission. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, creating a
There,
team.
we just write that all down. There we go. Anything else about the appointment process and everything that we've been through here that we want to feedback?
Maybe this is on Councilmember Etton's next piece, just if we wanted to go back to any of the things that the DEI folks mentioned in the terms or providing childcare or transportation or anything like that.
Not so much appointment process things as, or are you talking about maybe like childcare for the interviews or things like that, or?
Or the people who, wondering how that would work, or,
I'm just trying to think about for the interview process or the application process with this agenda item, but we probably still have some things we need to do related to people's service in general on commissions along those lines, so that may be a topic for perhaps not even Councilmember Atten's agenda item this evening. That might be a follow-up for another discussion. Councilmember Atten?
Coming back to the why, one of the big things the genesis of this was around improving diversity in our applicant pool and who's on our commissions, and I don't think we've gotten that piece yet. And I think that's on all of us, but it's also us looking maybe at some of our new processes. We're looking at how do we reach out in different ways. And I think we've touched on that before, but emails to our listserv, for example, reach a certain number of people who've applied before. I think, Rachel, you've expanded to some of our volunteers and things like that. So looking for how we continue to expand that out to try to reach different people, and how we make these, and this is maybe part of the next discussion, but how we make these commissions more relevant or more understandable for folks so they see what would be a reason to be part of this. What impacts are they having? How would it improve their community, the place where they've chosen to live? So I think that's a longer term thing, but we haven't gotten to that big why yet necessarily. I know we've tried some pieces, but based on our applications this year, we haven't hit that target yet.
It's not that different than past years
Right.
in that regard, yeah. And I think that may also get to the future agenda item from Councilmember Strawn as well, in terms of how we're getting things out into the community or getting the community in and all those things. So we'll be able to talk some about that during that agenda item as well. Mm-hmm. Right, anything else about the appointment process, interviews, everything like that?
I'll just add, Rebecca can, this is not just a commission question, this is a hiring question across the board. How do you make that change? I think since I've been on, it seems like there's a little bit more parity, so there's men to women, but beyond that, I don't know that we've made any real big changes anywhere, but it does seem like we have added more women to the commission since I have been on, which I appreciate, because having more balanced commissions in that regard is going to also bring a level of diversity. But in hiring, that's the big question. It's not that no one's asked it, it's just trying to figure, there's no magic answer, so.
Right. It's how do you get to people that you want to be a part of the process, yeah. All right, I think we've covered that fairly well then. Mr. Trojan.
You mentioned the appointment policy a couple times.
It doesn't sound like we're making any changes to
Okay.
the policy. I didn't
just
hear.
want to check.
Right,
Okay, that's
Right.
fine, that's fine by me.
okay, all right. Very good. So the kind of the follow-up items are the applications back for council consideration of the draft reappointment application, as well as kind of looking at potentially doing some tweak into the new appointment application and looking at the previous one versus the current one, just to make sure we're cool with all the questions on that. And then the interview process comes here, but it's still on a separate day, and it is done live and treated like any other council meeting in that sense for the video.
Can we mention that we maybe move it to 15 minutes instead of 10?
I think that all becomes a little bit of a function of how many applicants we have in each round, and how we manage the time. So I get that, and I heard that through
sorry.
this last process. So
Yeah,
I think that's around how many questions we,
Yeah.
we
Right,
ask
no,
3
yeah,
or
exactly.
4 if they're
Yeah.
applying to multiple, right? We limit the number of questions unless there's a necessary follow-up that will make that a lot easier.
right.
yeah, and if we don't all speak every time, whatever,
Yeah,
we
if-
know that there's a certain
Yeah,
set of
if we're all
questions.
cool with that, then that's all right. We can definitely do that. Because we have in the past. It's definitely been, when we've been, on the days when we would do an interview before a council meeting and we were trying to squeeze 24 interviews in before a full business meeting, we were zipping through people at 4 minutes a crack, and they got 2 questions, and that was, you
Yeah,
don't
I
want to go
just-
there.
I like the equity where they get
Yeah.
the same questions,
Right.
so they have an opportunity. We're comparing people with like sets of information and how they would handle similar situations.
All right. Noted. All right. If there's nothing else on this topic, then I think we can move to the related topic, at least it involves commissions,
Equal.
of the commission scopes, duties, and functions. This was brought up by Councilmember Atten. I don't know, Mr. Trudgeon, if you had anything by way of introduction. I can't remember our conversation earlier this evening.
Nothing directly.
All right, then we're going to turn it over to Councilmember Atten. to
Yeah, I think
introduce his
I've said a fair amount about this, in that I think that some of our commissions are feeling maybe neglected, Maybe like their work is, they don't have a lot of work, or their work is the wrong work. Or they could do the same work in 6 meetings instead of 11 or 12, as a starting point. Considering, one of the things I brought up when I brought this up initially, looking at committee work as a way to do some things. We have examples in a few different departments where smaller groups have been created, or actually sometimes larger groups that go out and reach different people in the community and bring them in with a group of commissioners, that we look at how we might do this work in new ways. I would be saying that we should take this out to commissions first and say, let's look at your scope and duty and functions. How does this fit? Do you think this should be changed or not? What changes do you recommend? Again, they're recommending things to us, but I would absolutely want them to be a deep part of that process. For this, I have kind of a time frame, maybe that they, by their July meeting, have brought forward, so they have May, June, and July to look these things over and make some suggestions. So by August, the council's looking at it, give us a few months so that before we're putting out notices for applications, that we are prepared with any adjustments that we want to make. So that genesis was around hearing from frustration from some commissions, seeing some commissions kind of stumble and saying, well, we don't have items, or we want to change the name of our commission, but really they want to change the scope of their commission, which is fine. Let's talk about it, right? So that's the genesis for me, and kind of what I'm hearing from commissions, and seeing how engaged some folks feel and some don't feel so engaged. And I think that's our job to make sure that commissions are being used in a good way, that the people serving feel like they are contributing in positive ways and we're not just spinning wheels.
Right. And I think actually, I was just, as you were describing that, it parallels a little bit our discussion we had at our last meeting about sort of looking at job descriptions and things like that for employees of the city. It's very much about, has there been a change from when code section 20 whatever was written about that commission, between what they actually do or what they think they ought to do versus what's written in that code. So I think that there's an opportunity to kind of match that. And I didn't mean to hijack the conversation so quickly, but I got so many.
Sometimes you get excited.
Yeah, I got so many ideas when you were talking there. The other, I thought that the 3-month time frame worked well in the sense that you could sort of have that first month as your discussion about sort of, the first look at this, and just generally some thoughts and ideas. The second discussion can be more of a trying to refine it a little bit and additional brainstorming, and then that final discussion can be sort of putting it all together. So that kind of makes some sense in that regard as to, just a broad outline of the process and how it could conceivably work. Because I do think that it will be helpful to give as much guidance to the commissions and their staff liaisons as possible as to how this should proceed and what the end product ought to be, and maybe what we don't need it to be, or something, some parameters, broad parameters that we don't want to necessarily overly restrict it, but we also may want to help focus it. So some thoughts. Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, of course, you guys all know me that I read the actual contracts, the detail of these things.
We don't.
No, but I kind of get into the, how things are written and how things should be run based on, if you're a commissioner, this should be your marching orders, right? This is how it works. But some thoughts on it is, I think the commissions are kind of like having in-house consultants and auditors in a way, which can be a really powerful asset. But like any consultant or auditor, if we don't define the project and purpose, we don't get the results we're looking for. Because even things like the basic and how these are written are very different. Some have purpose in them, some don't. The layouts are different, very vague duties. And I think we need to define what we expect from these commissions. So I agree with Commissioner that we should let the commissioners in these commissions come up with some ideas.
Safer, less time.
Yet, with that, we also need to figure out what do we want out of it. Because if you really look back at what is the purpose of a council or a commission, and it's basically, they're supposed to be, advising the council. It says here, advise the council. And so what kind of advice, what are we looking for? What do we actually want them to do? And so you do need, I think we can get some really great ideas from what the different commissions, what they've done, what they'd like to do. And then on top of that, I think we all need to come up with some thoughts on that as well. So I think we just don't want the commissions to define their scope and duty, but, and that we could take their ideas and then incorporate them is what I would say. But I would also like to see this be more of a universal way we do it, because if you look at some of these commissions are like, you got 2 sentences, and you got some that are 3 pages, and some say scope and duties, and then some have a purpose and scope and duty. So I think when you say define what we want, I think we want to define what is it we want them to, come up with your purpose, come up with your and so they're all coming back with some, kind of the format of what we're looking for, because it could get really interesting if you don't define that piece of it. And of course, there's some things in here that are a little vague, and some of them were very well done. I have to say, some of them I thought were really well done. It's just, I think some of them, they're not doing what these things are saying that they should be doing. And maybe that's because the council's given them different directions and we just never updated this. So that's kind of the piece of it too, is have them, what I mentioned earlier, if you were applying, you may want to go look at this, and if it's this vague thing and you're trying to answer the question, if you can't answer that question about what is, the purpose of the council by reading this, or the commission by reading this, well, then obviously this isn't written correctly. I mean, if you're brand new, you should be able to get and it doesn't mean you have to have it exact everything, but you should have it a little more defined on that. So anyways, I think we can, it's a powerful, be able to do it, and we want to define what it is, and also how many people. I know we have one commission that's got 9 people on it. Yeah, or 2, yeah. So do we really want 7 and 9? And I don't know if that's something we want at the commissions themselves, or, I mean, what part do we want them to talk about, and what part do we want to talk about? So that's my thoughts.
Well, and I do want to just note that past councils wrote those at various times.
Right.
And so it's like any other aspect of our code, in the sense that different parts are written better than others, depending on how you define better. And I know we tried to get consistency in our last few rounds through this, and with varying degrees of success. And I'm not trying to be defensive about it, but I do agree it does vary by commission too. Because I don't know that you can say a lot about the Police Civil Service Commission, because it just basically says per what state statutes tells you have to do.
Right.
That's that.
Yeah, that's easy enough. But yeah.
I do agree, and obviously Planning Commission is going to have some stricter parameters around it based on legal requirements and things like that too. But yeah, I think we do want to be consistent there, and so that's about code writing, and I think that's our job. I think the request is to get some more information to synthesize into code writing, and then obviously how the code language gets translated to other communications that we do for prospective applicants, or on our website, how we describe the commission and things like that. So it's all tied together. So yeah, Councilmember Strawn.
I think that we should take one of the examples of one that's written well and use that as a template. I totally agree that moving that back to the commissions is the respectful thing to do. For us to just make changes has caused acrimony in the past for commissions when things have changed without their knowledge or their input. And so I think that would be the wrong way to start. But I think if there's a situation, even if the Police Civil Service Commission has a finally very narrow scope, if they at least have the same purpose, goals, times of meeting, I'm sure that could at least be a 1 page if they had all the same headings as everybody else. I thought some other things that would maybe be helpful to hear from their point of view would be what they thought an ideal number of members would be, or an ideal number of meetings, how often they should come to the city council. Some other groups we haven't seen, or we see so infrequently, I couldn't pick those people out. And maybe like a job review, like what do you see as the best accomplishments and when does this, and sometimes I know they've had a quorum issue in some of the groups that we just put 4 people on. So, if they have, for a while, they had so much to do and then they had so little. So I think we need to be really clear, but I do think a lot of what they do for the coming year is what we discuss in the time when we are together. But I think we have to make sure that we continue to have those regular meetings. But I would really like to send out to them their opportunity to kind of review how they work with us and what they see as a way that they could work. Where is their sweet spot? And it's probably gonna vary depending on who's on that council at the time and who's sitting here. But I think it would be great, but I see it as a lot longer than 3 months. I see it as 3 months, we get their information back, but then it's time for us to synthesize and build from there.
Yes.
So that really by next spring, we're ready to maybe start actually having a new normal, whatever that is. But I think it's a great idea because they are very different in what expectations and knowing what people can't perform well if they don't know what they're expected to do. And I think making sure, especially the chair and vice chair of each commission are, maybe even have a little bit more time to kind of review those things, kind of a special time where they talk specifically about, what it means to lead and the expectations on bringing that information back. But an example is like the DEI piece on the resolutions that come back. I read those every time to see what the DEI impact is. I would love if we had that kind of impact on, I'll ask, when's the last time the Finance Commission saw this? If they haven't seen it for a year and a half, then it's maybe not as important information. So just knowing when and how they get information, and they have opinions. So we should start with asking them, because they're more than happy to share. And even the people who came to the meeting or to our interviews and brought props, that was super helpful for us to have an idea of, they felt heard. And I think we just need to make sure people feel heard, and more people are more likely to want to continue to be on these commissions, even as life kind of comes out of post-COVID.
Councilmember Garoff?
I think all the discussion's been really good. Go back to the commissions, obviously. I think this is the way to do it, get their input. I agree with council members, both Strawn and Schroeder, that this should be more standardized. We could do a better job on that. But really find out where they're at. There are reasons that those commissions were 9 and some were 7. We had piled a lot of work on some of them at one point. There's different reasons. So see what they think. I don't want us to narrow these descriptions and scopes and everything down so that it's so specific that in 5 years everyone's going to go and say, why were they doing that? So there has
Investigate
to be some
why
balance.
turtles are crossing.
Yeah.
Yes.
There has to be some balance in there. So, but we'll get that back from the commission. So.
One thing I did want to ask about the 3-month timeframe. We just appointed a whole bunch of new people to commissions who may not even have gotten their feet too wet yet. And do we want to start that 3-month period like immediately there? So that we've got a lot of people who don't have a lot of complete understanding of things being asked to weigh in on things, or do we want to give folks a little bit more chance to have a couple of regular meetings before they start that, or what does the council think about that? Councilmember Hatton?
I think it's a good point. I actually was wondering if we should have done all the appointments if we were going to do this, but people are there now.
Yeah.
And I think it's really one commission that we're talking about is that impacted with that high of a percentage of its members. And so if we want to punt and give them an extra, this is going to take us some time to go through, right? We could, if there are a couple that need more time, like the Park and Rec Commission may need very little time, but they also are running into, they don't usually have a July meeting or June meeting because of Rosefest. So maybe we say, hey, these commissions we know are going to meet and they have a pretty solid core. We can look for these by August and we can look for these by September and work through them in patches to give them a little more time to settle in some, or to work through their normal break month or something like that. So I'm open to that. I really do feel like we should be able to get this done in 6 months.
And the council should be able to act on it.
The council should be able to act on it. I think they should.
We have to hold up our end of it, yeah.
Yeah.
the end of the year gets tight, but, yeah. I was just gonna say, I think that's all a good timeline.
Councilman Schroeder and then staff.
And just a question, do you think there'd be some value if the chairs or the chairs and the vice chairs of all the commissions got together in a meeting to talk about commissions in general and how they could work amongst themselves and with
As
each
part of this
other?
process?
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, especially, I don't know, I'm just wondering, because they seem kind of siloed at sometimes, and I don't know if it would be a good way for the chairs to get together and discuss some of this. I don't know. I don't know if that'd be value or not, so I'd leave that some thought on that. I don't know.
I will report that the commissioners liked the training because they all got together and were able to kind of socialize and get to know each other.
Good.
And obviously, you can't necessarily do that with a quorum of a commission. So the chairs and vice chairs getting together amongst the commissions may be an opportunity to do some of that, in addition to having some of the conversations we've talked about. Mr. Judge.
So, just listening to the conversation, I think it's very clear and it makes a lot of sense to go back to the commissions to talk about their role and scope and what they're doing and all the particulars, as everybody's mentioned here. And I do think we'll get to the ordinance when we get to it after the end of the process, so it's a good marker to say, yep, we're gonna have to standardize them, look at them so they're more readable and stuff like that. And so, I don't think we're talking about it anymore, but I think that can happen later. The point's been made, I think, and I would 100% agree. You look at them sometimes, they're like, what is this trying to say? I think my biggest caution going into it or concern is making sure the council's really clear, written out clear on what they're asking. Because what we're doing then is having the staff liaisons go back and ask those questions, and if they don't understand what they're asking for, if it's very open, the commission's gonna struggle, and you're gonna get these answers. So, and I know we just started talking about timelines and stuff like that. I think this is something that should come back to the council with some very specific, written out questions or thoughts, so we can have that conversation, and then it's very clear that myself and Rebecca can report back to the staff liaisons that here's what it is and here's more of the background information. I think in the end that'd be more valuable. I'm not saying you wouldn't do that, but I'm just saying as we look to try to get the answers so quickly, we may want to make sure we have to know what we're asking about first. And make
Our own purpose statement?
I think maybe, along those lines, it may be helpful, dare I suggest, a council subcommittee of a couple council members work with staff on maybe drafting something up to bring back to the rest of the council to go through at that next discussion. Perhaps an interested party that brought the agenda item forward in the first place, plus another council member, or whatever. But that might be a way to do, because we could spend a lot of time talking amongst ourselves here
Yeah.
and say the same things over and over again and not realize what we've said in the first place.
Right.
Can I pull one of my colleagues down there who've been on other commissions?
I can help.
Okay.
I'd be happy to help.
I think the experience that some of us had who've been on commissions, been chairs of commissions,
More
been regular
recently.
members of
Yeah.
commissions.
Yeah.
It's important.
More
Yeah,
recently,
I
are you
can
saying I'm
be able
old?
to-
No, I'm saying I wouldn't be as helpful because I can't
Oh.
remember when I was on.
Yeah.
Can I say one other thing, and this is a
Sure,
little bit
sure.
tangential, but when we were talking about the new members, I still think I don't want them to think that their information isn't important,
Right.
because as a
Right.
new
Yes.
member,
Right.
it's important too, and it's
Right.
important in a
It's not that
different
we
way.
don't want their information, we just want them to be informed
Yeah.
better when they provide their, because it's hard to say, what do you like about being on the commission when
True.
they're still trying to figure out which night of the month it is that they meet, and some things like that, just getting those basic comfort levels and understandings of
It
the
takes
process
a while to
down. Right,
understand.
Right.
yeah.
But they may
Yeah.
have a different viewpoint than someone who's been on
Absolutely,
it for
and we
6
want
years.
that, and we want that, and that's one of the criteria that we're looking for those who are potential applicants, asking what we look for.
I just wanted to clarify that, because I didn't want people to go away from this meeting thinking
Right,
we're going.
right, no, absolutely, thank you, thank you. So that sounds like kind of our direction, and I don't know, do we have a time when we want this to come back before the council?
Yeah, next meeting.
Mr. Treasurer?
Yeah, we can certainly do next meeting. May 15th is on the city council agenda. We don't have much of an agenda, so that'd be
That sounds like a perfect
really good date too. May 8th is getting a little crowded. We'll talk about it here shortly.
Oh,
A little
okay.
crowded, but doesn't mean we can't talk about it both meetings either if the thing's ready to go. I'll leave that to you.
That sounds good. Anything else as the bringer of this item forward?
Bringer of noise.
That's a technical.
No, I've got enough. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Yeah, but I definitely wanted to re-emphasize the whole notion of being respectful of all the commissioners by giving them as clear of a direction as we can.
That's fair.
That is something
Appreciate that,
that we've
yeah.
had on us before.
We wanna make sure they
And the
really
only other thing
value
I'll say
them.
on this topic is that I think that any of the processes we've had that we've gone through to change the scope, duty, and functions of commissions has actually been very engaging with the commissions. I mean, I can remember Councilmember Laliberte and I spent time with members of both the Community Engagement Commission and the Human Rights Commissions at the time, and spent several meetings with members of them going through all of the things, and it was really helpful to the process. And so I think that we want to carry on that aspect of it. As
We would
make sure
want,
that we-
for example, commission chairs to come in and, or chairs and their vice chairs to come in and present as
potentially,
part of that, yeah.
certainly, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's add a middle-of-the-month meeting right there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Work
Instead of setting
session,
up-
yeah,
Absolutely.
without a lot of other agenda items.
Yes.
Absolutely.
There we go. All right. With that, then, I think that brings us to, we don't have any meeting minutes, we don't have any direction to provide on other councilmember-initiated items, so that is the consent agenda. Hey, it's up on the screen, Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 10A approves payments in the amount of $1,734,092.27. Item 10B, we already took up. Item 10C approves a resolution to provide easements to Metropolitan Council for sewer lines that go through city land. It was recently discovered that some of the easements were not actually conveyed to Met Council in 1871 when they took over the portion of the city's sanitary sewer system to create regional interceptor pipes. This action will provide utility easements for 3 locations that are in Central Park. Item 10D is receiving the first quarter financial report. This report provides information regarding revenues and expenditures through March 30th of this year. As noted in the report, both revenues and expenditures will not always be at the expected amount due to the timing of receiving revenues and incurring expenses. Nevertheless, the report provides good information about the state of our funds. I would also note that we have used a new format to show the status of the funds and hope that you found the new format meaningful and clear to refer to. And finally, item 10E authorizes entering into an agreement with MuniCode to conduct recodification and online hosting of the city code. This work will provide better access to the city code for city staff, council, and the public, and will ensure that the code is always up to date. Funds for this work were included in the 2023 budget. That's the consent agenda.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion on the consent items?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Strawn, to approve those items or receive those items. Any discussion on the motion? No. I think the only thing I wanted to just observe on the quarterly financial report is that in the past, we received some kind of indication of how the percent to the total year related to past years. So we could kind of see.
Historical reference
Yeah,
point,
you know,
yep.
Obviously, it's very easy to understand that maybe we don't have a lot of revenues in yet from one particular source because it comes in later in the year. But it is helpful, I think, for a lot of the ones that spread out more to see, okay, are we tracking and trending with past years? So just wanted to make that observation.
Okay.
All right, we've got the motion before us on the consent agenda. If there's no other discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those items are approved or received. That brings us to future agenda review. Mr. Trudgeon, you're on again.
Okay, May 8th, we have a proclamation for National Police Officers Memorial Day and National Police Week proclamation. We will have a joint meeting of the Police Civil Service. We'll have the audit presentation. We'll also have the Councilmember Strawn's item regarding city council engagement, and then plan for the closed session for the city manager performance review. May 15th, we do have an EDA meeting, a couple business items about receiving an award, talk about the Small Business Micro Loan Program, consider replenishment of the Roseville Revolving Loan Fund, and potentially a TIF district report, kind of a status update. We're still trying to work through that. If we convene into the, well, we will convene into the city council meeting. Right now, we just have one item, receive update on the classification compensation study. This is the date we hopefully can meet regarding comparable cities and some of the follow-up discussion we had last time. So we're still working on that, so that may change, but that's the only topic we have. So that's why I brought up the commission discussion. Might be a good time to have it.
Perfect. All right. All right, any other reports or liaison updates from council members or future agenda items?
Future would, not future agenda, but May 4th, Northeast Youth and Family Services will be having an open house from 4:30 until 6 at their building, and it'll be going through some of the new programs and getting to meet some of the new staff. They've hired 10 new therapists, and we now do not have a waiting list for therapy, which is really
That's really unique.
Wow.
So,
Oh, that's awesome.
so it'd be nice if some of us could show up there and give them some support.
And that was on May 4th?
May 4th.
Got it.
I know it's a little early, but get it in your calendars early, right?
Sure. All right, other reports, announcements? I would just note that Roseville Business Council, in partnership with the Metro Twin Cities North Chamber and St. Paul Area Chamber, is Wednesday morning at 7:30 here in the council chambers. An update on the Rice-Larpenteur Alliance and things that have been going on with those folks. And it's open to the public. You can
Right.
go to Grow Roseville and register if you want to.
Right, and you can also check in online as well if you can't be here in
Right.
person.
That's a good point. In person, and you can watch remotely and participate. All right.
Well, and the League of Metro Cities, some of us were at that.
Oh, Metro Cities had their election of
meeting.
members and.
And they also had the state demographer speak, which was really a good information. And I was thinking when I was reading through some of our commissions, the Human Rights Commission would really benefit from that information.
Yeah, and actually, it's probably kind of a good plug for our Roseville Business Council too, because we actually had the demographer at the Business Council several months ago.
Yeah, and she's really
very
good.
good.
Yeah, she does a really.
Maybe this is just a plug for the state demographer.
Maybe so.
now that I think about it. All
I
right.
thought it was helpful.
Yeah,
Thank
she's
you.
fun and engaging.
If there's no other business before the council, the only other item on our agenda is adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Play a game of chicken.
Moved by Councilmember Atten, second by Councilmember Schroeder to adjourn. No discussion on motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we're adjourned at 9:04 PM. Thank you, everyone.